I'd like to welcome everybody for taking the time to participate in this event. For those who don't know me, my name is Curtis Cost. I'm a writer. I wrote a couple of books on the vaccines, and I've been involved in the HIV/AIDS debate many years ago with Dr. Rasnick has been involved in, and I work with community outreach with CHD, Children's Health Defense. I want to say that I think today is going to be a very informative and even historic event because we have two powerhouses, I mean, giants in the scientific community and scholars, Dr. James Weiler and Dr. Dave Raskin. They have very extensive bios, so I'm going to let them in a moment introduce themselves. I would encourage all of you to have a pen and pad ready, because you're going to want to take notes, and as they speak, you're going to want to later ask them questions. I'm going to go over real quick what the format is going to look like. The first half, I will ask the speakers to a few questions, and they'll be given roughly 3-minute increments to respond, and then we'll go back and forth a few times, maybe like 2 or 3 times, so they can get their points out on each question. And I will ask the speakers to try to keep your answers on a level for newbies. I mean, a lot of people aren't really technically knowledgeable on these type of subjects. So as much as possible, if you can keep it user-friendly, that would be great. If you want to use a very technical term, it would be great if you would define it so people are stay on track and we can make this a very user-friendly event. The second half of this, which will start in about an hour from the time this begins, will be devoted to you, the audience, asking your questions of the speakers. And so that'll be your time, and I will put a limit on that because Bryce has plenty of time, and this will be recorded, and so a lot of good information will be able to come out. So with that in mind, if all that is clear, I'm going to start off with the first question. And I will start with Dr. Weiler, and we're going to go back and forth on this question a few times. Let's get my stopwatch ready. Okay. Okay. The first question is to Dr. Weiler, and then you both can respond back and forth.
Yeah.
The coronavirus tests, how reliable are they? So, Dr. Weiler, you got the floor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Curtis. You said you wanted us to introduce ourselves, but
yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Stop the question part. Dr. Wheeler, take a minute or two and introduce yourself. Then we're going to go to Dr. Raskin. Right. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So just briefly, I want to keep my introduction very brief. My name is Dr. James Lyons Weiler. I'm a lifelong biomedical research scientist. I've been doing, biology since 1986 at the undergraduate level. I've been doing research since 1991, and I have a massive breadth, I say that humbly, of and depth of experience in research. I'm an evolutionary biologist by training. I have published in evolutionary biology. I've published in on viruses. I've published on biomedical research extensively because when I was a postdoc at Penn State University working on molecular evolution and molecular evolutionary genetics, I decided, since George W. Bush made an announcement that any research proposal to the NSF that contained the word evolution was not going to be funded, that I decided that I had a new child on the way and I wanted to be able to raise a family. I decided to go into biomedical research, and I helped create the field of bioinformatics. I formalized a paradigm for analyzing massive amounts of data from new technologies that allowed us to measure 40,000 genes at a time, then 20,000 genes and 400,000 proteins at one time. I'm an expert in systems biology. I have become, over the past 3 years, more of an expert in epidemiology. I have extensive background in statistical analysis, I was the bioinformatics analysis core director at the University of Pittsburgh, where I had a budget of $650,000 and a staff of 4 members, um, to crank through data of all types from all areas of biomedical research, all divisions and all departments in the School of Medicine, the Graduate School of Public Health, and so on. I'm a father of 2, and I'm friends with most everyone on the call, and I'm becoming a fan of Dr. Rasnick.
Thank you. Dr. Rasnick?
Oh, hi. I'm Dave Rasnick. I have a PhD in chemistry. I have BS degrees in biology and chemistry. I worked 20 years in the biotech pharmaceutical industry on arthritis, emphysema, parasites, and cancer. I left the pharmaceutical industry in 1996. I was fed up with it. And I went across the bay in San Francisco to Berkeley and joined up with Professor Peter Duesberg at University of California in Berkeley. And we have been working on, we started out because we're both very strong critics and dissidents of the HIV/AIDS hypothesis, and we're fairly notorious in some people's minds about that. But Peter and I, because we got together on this, and he could get no funding at all because he was cut off from funding because he's a member of the National Academy of Sciences, would have gotten the Nobel Prize for discovering the first human cancer genes. But he criticized the HIV hypothesis of AIDS, and he hasn't had any grant funding, new funding since the late 80s. Hasn't had a graduate student since the early 90s. And but because he couldn't do that, he decided to go on and work on a different view of cancer, chromosomal imbalance. The technical word is aneuploidy. It turns out that all cancers have unbalanced chromosomes. Peter and I started working on this together on the chromosomal imbalance theory of cancer in December 1996, right before 1997. We've been working on it steadily since then. We've published numerous articles on AIDS and cancer, both experimental and theoretical. I published a book for cancer researchers on chromosomal imbalance theory of cancer. I've written a novel to make it accessible to civilians, so to speak, the general reader, about what was wrong with the whole HIV/AIDS debacle. And I've recently finished a manuscript called The Elephants in the Lab. It's unpublished. It's for the general reader. It explains accessible. The idea is to be an accessible explanation of cancer to the general reader. And I was reluctant to get involved in all this coronavirus stuff because I'd already devoted 3 decades of my life or more on this HIV nonsense. And I didn't really, back in February, I thought this thing would blow over. This coronavirus stuff would blow over. And then it's ramping up really, really fast. And I realized, aha, I've seen this before, only this is much bigger. And that was the AIDS stuff back in the 80s. So finally, a few people twisted my arm. So I said, yep, it's my duty. I've got to do my part. And that's why I'm here today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Raskin. Okay, going back to the,
by the way.
Rasnick. I'm sorry. I've been so stressed out about this going so well that, you forgive me, Rasnick. I'm sorry. So I'm gonna go back to the question. A big part of some of the things we're going to cover is going to be the test and some related issues. But to Dr. Weiler, the question basically is the coronavirus test, I know there's a PCR and the antibody test, are these tests reliable, or rather, how reliable are they? Okay, Dr. Rasnick. I'm sorry, Dr. Weiler.
Okay, thank you very much. And it'll go well, Curtis. I'm sure this is going to be fine. So thank you for doing this. I really appreciate you, bringing these questions forward. So it depends on which test you're asking about. The CDC's test, I have asked CDC and FDA, and both have stopped responding to my emails, even though they were emailing back for the sensitivity and specificity those are technical terms, which I'll define in a minute, the accuracy and the pathogen specificity of their PCR test. PCR is also a technical term, but we don't have time to go into the technical details of how PCR works. But it's an important aspect and helps determine the accuracy. If you ask me about CDC's test, I can say right now, so far as I know, no one knows how accurate it is. I did do an analysis of their kit. I emailed them what I saw that were flaws in their kit. The FDA thanked me for it and said that they were going to bring that up in group discussion. The CDC wants people to believe that the problem with their kit is that it can produce false positives. If you look at all the headlines, it's about false positives. That means if the test is run on you, that it's going to make it look like you have the virus when you don't. And in reality, my analysis and other people's analysis have shown that it's actually the opposite. It's much worse to get a false negative. They ran this test, they shipped out a flawed test that was prone to false negatives. And when the people were on the Princess Cruise Line ship, they tested them, and the people that they said were negative, they were ready to release them. They were about to release them to a mall that tested negative. And CDC never evaluated their own test. It was by other people trying to reconcile what they were seeing with the cases that were in front of them and the results of their own PCR tests that they had developed, where they said, oh, CDC's test must be flawed. The CDC had a chance to adopt an accurate test, a validated test from the Germans that actually validated a PCR test by taking sputum samples and putting the viral RNA into the sputum samples of people that didn't have COVID-19 to look at sensitivity, the ability to detect a true positive if it's there, to detect the molecule if it's really there. They also took those negative sputum samples and didn't spike them with anything to see what the probability of a false positive was for their PCR test. And the sensitivity was extremely high. It was over 95%, as I recall. The specificity, that is the false positive rate, was 0. The specificity was 100%. And then they did what I thought was very clever, which was they took a bunch of people that were sick from respiratory viruses, a lot of people, I think it was about like 144 people with respiratory virus infections, but not flu and not COVID, and to see about the pathogen specificity. And their test was already published and it was validated. And on January 16th, we could have had a test and we could have done contact tracing. Instead, CDC had to keep their centralized power, they wanted to validate everybody else's test. So they rushed to make a test and they sent the test out and it was flawed. So I have very publicly chastised CDC and the entire paradigm. Having a bioweapons defense system where one culture is responsible for all the decision making about the processes and the procedures, where it's all geographically located in one location, and it's at the CDC. Those three things mean recipe for disaster, failure.
Yeah, Dr. Rasnick, we're over time. I just want to be clear. You're saying that the PCR test from the CDC is not reliable. You wouldn't recommend that.
The PCR is not reliable. There are antibody tests that I know of that we'll talk about. I'm sure it'll come up again, that are extremely sensitive, extremely specific, because they use 7 different biomarkers to detect
so you believe the antibody
proteins.
tests, there are antibody tests that are very reliable. That's your position.
There are tests that are very reliable for this.
Okay, great. Okay, Dr. Rasnick, it's your time.
Okay, well, I take a completely different perspective on that. I guess that's why I'm on here, or there'd be no point. I don't even know where to begin with this. Well, let me start. I sent you guys a list of assumptions when you're going to have a discussion like this. And the most obvious assumption is that there is a catastrophically deadly global viral pandemic. That's the first thing that people assume. Otherwise, there would be no need for this test. And the carnage is so colossal, we are told, that it justifies destroying the lives and liberties of millions of people, the very liberties that millions of people over the centuries gave their lives to establish and defend. I understand the second part of this program, starting around 7 p.m., we'll address that aspect a little bit more. From my perspective, the deadly coronavirus pandemic is demonstrably not true. So that assumption that there is a coronavirus pandemic is not true. The evidence is really not there. Now, I know people that watch all the TV and they read the New York Times and all that stuff, they'll say I'm a fool and they'll probably stop listening to this. But if you look at other sources of information around the world, you find out that there's no data to really support this. The second assumption is the virus to be tested, does it actually exist? Now, as of now, I'm not convinced that the claimed coronavirus exists. I'll be happy to change my mind given sufficient evidence of that. I don't mind. I mean, coronaviruses do exist. They cause the common cold. Now, it's a stretch of the imagination that a minor modification in a coronavirus is going to lead to the destruction of the world and all of our liberties. So that's a serious, serious problem. And if you're going to make that kind of a statement, you better be damn well sure that these tests that we heard Jack talking about, there's real arguments about the quality of these things. And these for people that I assume accept the coronavirus pandemic and the existence of this deadly cold virus. All right. The third assumption is that something must turn this, what I call Dr. Jekyll coronavirus, which causes a common cold, into a massively deadly Mr. Hyde coronavirus. The evidence for a Mr. Hyde coronavirus is completely lacking. I don't see it anywhere. And I've looked at the literature and tried to find out, okay, where are the studies that actually demonstrated the pathogen, first of all, that this virus exists. Second of all, that it causes disease and this horrid pathology that we see on the television all the time. It's just not there. It's certainly not in the scientific literature. The fourth assumption is that an accurate, reliable, and reproducible test for the Mr. Hyde coronavirus exists. At present, there is no such test. And I'll go even further on this. There will not be such a test by using PCR for RNA viruses. They just can't, in principle, it cannot exist. Why do I say that? Because we've been using PCR-based viral load tests for HIV now for 30 years, and the package inserts that come with these HIV viral load tests say explicit in there, the FDA required package inserts say that these tests, these viral load tests, cannot be used to screen for the presence of HIV, nor confirm the presence of HIV. And that's after 30 years of these things being on the market. And here we're talking about a viral load test or a PCR test for an unconfirmed virus causing an unconfirmed pandemic, destroying the world with a PCR test. And in just 6 months, we've got an accurate test. I don't buy it. And I sure hope the public doesn't either.
Okay, a little bit over time. Okay, Dr. Dr. Weiler, it's your turn to respond.
So here's the problem with the assumption that because the studies haven't been done yet, that we haven't demonstrated pathogenicity of this virus in the lab, that it's not necessarily a pathogen. Let me give you my evolutionary perspective on the virus first. I don't think this is a new virus. I think that everyone has it backwards. I think this virus is deadly and has come into the Chinese population multiple times, and it killed people routinely for, I don't know, a long time. But it wasn't this particular virus. It was the ancestor of this virus. This virus is the sister lineage to the SARS virus. There's no doubt that the SARS virus exists. There's no doubt that the SARS virus causes pathophysiology, at least in the scientific circles that I travel in, because, and I'll give you some of the examples that are indirect evidence that the virus exists, that are sufficiently, able that we can conclude. We can take the SARS virus, we can isolate it from an infected person at the viral level or at the mRNA level. We can take those molecules or the virion, that's individual viruses, sample of viruses, and we can infect mice. We know this because part of the genetic manipulation that everybody knows has been going on now because on these viruses was done specifically in, at the University of North Carolina, Ralph Barrick's lab, University of North Carolina.
Comorbidity.
Could you mute everybody except for me, please?
Oh, yeah.
I love the sound of children's voices.
Yeah,
But
can you mute everybody else except for Dr. Not me. Don't mute me, but
Yeah, I had everybody but the three of you muted. I don't know how that one.
okay, so
Frankly,
Ralph,
I enjoyed listening to the baby.
yeah.
Life.
I'm,
how is that possible?
I don't know. She somehow keeps unmuting herself, even though I've muted her.
anyway, the virus itself, the SARS virus, in laboratories can infect and does cause respiratory ailments in rats, mice, and ferrets. That's the SARS virus. The reason why I think that the SARS-CoV-2 virus is older than SARS is because the way that viruses come into the population is that they accommodate, they adapt to the population that they're coming into, the new species they're coming into. And SARS is a pussycat compared to this one. Now, I'm not saying that this one is, what did you call it, a Jekyll and Hyde? I'm not saying that it's Ebola. I'm certainly not saying that it's Ebola. But I am saying that we have to be technically correct in how we describe and discuss this. And if we adopt the untenable position that the virus doesn't exist, we do not have a platform upon which we can negotiate and stand firm and hold firm on the dystopian future that they're trying to build. We must meet them on the battlefield where we have at least 1 foot in reality. And the reality is that the phylogenetic analysis of the mRNA, the actual evolutionary story of SARS-CoV-2 is published on the IPAC website. The spike protein existed in a sample I discovered by doing this molecular data mining. I discovered that the spike protein existed back in 2005 in a sample that the Chinese had published. Ralph Barrick's lab downloaded that sequence. They didn't know it was not SARS. They thought it was SARS. They brought it up in the lab. They infected mice with it. So the degree of the conspiracy, and I hate to use that word because look at who we're talking about. We're all one community. But the degree of conspiracy that would have to exist for 12 years of publications on SARS, transfection, bringing it into animals, studying the pathophysiology of the disease, studying the function of the disease. People build their careers around this and get tenure on this. For a virus that doesn't exist, if it's a lie, it's the biggest lie that was ever told. And I'm convinced that the virus does exist and that it's actually not helpful to us to play in the realm as if the virus doesn't exist when everybody else in the world wants to take your rights away over people that are dying from an infection from the virus. It's not going to be helpful.
Dr. Weiler, we've gone over time. Try to make the time when you were interrupted by the
My turn?
So it's your, okay, it's your go.
All right.
Dr.
I don't dispute the SARS thing. I was talking about this new one. And are we still there?
Yeah, I hear you.
And for the purposes of debate, it doesn't matter whether, from my perspective, it doesn't matter to me really whether this new coronavirus exists or doesn't exist. The only reason I bring it up as to I'm not convinced that anybody has actually isolated a new pathogenic virus that could cause such a plague, because you have to have this virus in order to have a test for it. That's why I bring it up. So this debate was about the test. Now, if you actually had an authentic virus, which I'm prepared to accept once I see the evidence, that's fine. Now, we're talking about viruses that don't exist. This goes back to the HIV. Now, I don't say viruses don't exist. There's a lot of viruses that do exist. But there are some that have never been detected in any human being. HIV is one of them. Another one is hepatitis C. HCV has never been detected in a single human being. The only place that I've been able to discover where HIV exists is in the laboratory. You can purchase it. We've worked with it in the laboratory, do electron microscopy on it. You can spike samples of human blood plasma with it. You can see it with an EM, but nobody has ever seen HIV using electron microscopy in any human being. Same thing with hepatitis C. And right now I've been looking a lot to try to find electron microscopy confirmation of this new virus in primary human tissues. Not done yet, it's not clear. There was a New England Journal of Medicine publication that came out late last year, and they showed EM pictures, but I read the paper a little bit more closely, and it looked like it was on cell cultures, growing the virus in cultures of cancer cells and maybe some normal human cells, but it's not clear because they took the cells from human cancer patients, their lungs. And they did TEM on it, and sure enough, they got some, which is electron microscopy. It sure enough looked like a coronavirus, but then they showed other, and inside the cells, but it wasn't clear that these were the primary tissues from the patient. That's absolutely crucial. You have to look at the virus itself. Forget about the RNA, forget about PCR, forget about any of this other stuff. You have to start with the entity itself, the virus itself. That was never done with HIV, it was never done with HCV, and to the best of my knowledge, it has not been done with this new coronavirus.
Okay, I'm going to go to the next question, which is tied into what you've started to allude to. Next question deals with purification of a virus. Now, for some people, I'm sure that's a new term. And I would like to ask you, Dr. Raskin, if you could help us understand, what does it mean to obtain a purified sample of a virus, and why is that important in developing a reliable test? So what does it mean to purify a virus, and why is that important in developing a reliable test?
Well, purification just goes back, excuse me, to Robert Koch. Robert Koch's postulates back in the 19th century. And it's basically this. If you have a suspected infectious agent, a virus, bacterium, it doesn't matter what it is, you have to separate it out as much as possible from all other materials, as much as you can. Then you infect a susceptible host, either an animal or another person, and see if you reproduce the symptoms. Once you've reproduced those symptoms, aha, you say, good, I'm on to something. Now you try to recover that virus or bacterium from the newly infected animal or human, and then characterize it again, look at it with electron microscopy or cell culture, and then reinfect it. You just keep going on that for a period of time until you're satisfied. That's how it used to be done. You actually worked with real infectious agents. Nowadays, people don't do that. They got started with HIV because they could never find the real infectious agent, so they stopped looking for it. And they started developing tests based on genetic material or making antibodies against certain proteins that Robert Gallo and some others claimed were actually the proteins of HIV. Those are the tests that were used with HIV. And those were developed over a period of years. Now we're talking about, what is it, my Lord, over 20,000 publications since January on this coronavirus stuff. How is that possible to have so many publications on coronavirus stuff since January of this year on something like that? I mean, that's not science. I don't know what that is, but that's not science. Science is slow, it's plodding, it's error prone, it's always provisional. You're never satisfied with it. We have jumped to conclusions here that set the whole
Hello, something's happening.
with nothing substantive. I'm sorry?
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's a little problem. Keep going. You got about 40
I'm done.
seconds.
My throat's a little dry. I'll let
Not a
y'all take
problem.
over it and I drink my tea.
Not a problem. Dr. Weiler, you're around.
Okay, so the very first evidence that there was a new virus, right? The coroner and people doing the molecular biology had studied the lung tissue. They screened it for flu. They screened it for other viruses, and they found no viruses, but they were able to amplify the SARS-CoV-2 virus genome from that very lung sample. They sequenced it. So they have the nucleotide sequences, the A's, the T's, the C's, and the G's of the genome. They blasted it against all of the known nucleotide sequences that are published by all the scientists from around the world, and it matched closest to SARS. Now, that is not technically isolating the virus and then transmitting it to another person and getting the same symptoms, but you don't get a match to SARS with the distinctive characteristics of the sequence that make it different from SARS unless it was in the sample that you pulled from the lung. So from my standard and level of evidence, they detected a novel coronavirus, novel to science. I already told you that in my view, a SARS-2 CoV-2-like virus already existed in 2005, had the same exact spike protein functional motif pattern. I take issue with the idea that HIV's never been isolated from anything other than in the lab. I'm very familiar with a study of HIV samples, blood samples taken from a dentist's office in Florida when I was back in graduate school. And they found that the dentist was not changing the components of the drill. And so he was transmitting HIV from patient to patient. The drill would take up the tissue from the patient, and then the next patient would be infected by the drill. We also know that 90% of people transfused with HIV antibody positive blood from blood banks, 90% of them become HIV positive with no other risk factors to HIV. And so this is about coronavirus. Let's stick with coronavirus. I don't think it's related to the HIV question, but obviously HIV also has genomes that are published, also shows an evolutionary history with SIV and with the, okay, there's a lot of controversy about that, but that just messes this up. This makes it muddy because from Koch's postulates then, what I just said earlier, what I had previously already said, was that they can transmit the genome of this virus through the internet, over the airwaves, up to the satellite, and comes down to Earth again in Ralph Barrick's lab. And then he can create that mRNA molecule in the lab and then expose that to a mouse. And with a little modification that they considered minor modification, it can infect the mouse tissue, and the mice develop the pathophysiology associated with SARS. The reason why the science has not been done on infecting mice with SARS-CoV-2 is because they just found it. And if they find another virus in West Africa and it's a relative of Ebola and we never found it before and it's new, well, they just found it. Now, we all can drive ourselves mad by a week from now, if they find an Ebola relative, and I just said that, I didn't predict it. I don't have any special knowledge. I'm using it as an example. I'm not involved in anybody creating viruses to make the human population, any of that stuff, okay? I'm for choice, I'm for your rights. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that what we have is a virus that has not been successful yet in invading the human species. It has tried multiple times. The antibodies are there in China, if you look for it. And it through evolution, probably involved in a sample that was brought into the lab, and we're going to go there on the lab origin hypothesis, I'm sure. There were modifications that were made that made it have a prolonged asymptomatic period. Are the public health measures far too draconian? Absolutely. There's a very, very simple solution to this. The very simple solution is a 2-week, more than 60% lockdown of people, along with prophylactic use of antivirals and private testing.
Okay.
Those three things are in combination. I know we'll get to it, but those three things are in combination. We can end this in 2 weeks.
Okay. That's why I just want to be clear. So you're saying that this new coronavirus strain, I think you believe it already existed, but in terms of us recognizing it, it has not been purified, and the Koch's standards have not been met, but there are other things that have been done that you think are sufficient. Would that be a pretty good description?
Yeah, I mean, listen, we can trace the genetic genealogy of people that have infected each other by sequencing the genome, and that's been done. We can see the trace patterns of which people infect other people by looking at the mRNA sequences. And if it
I
was
know
something that,
before you go to these, we've got to move on to next. But you would agree that basically saying you haven't so far. Science has to be able to follow Koch's postulates to the letter, but you've
just
got
hasn't happened yet.
other things that you think are credible and still prove that this virus is causing these conditions. That's
It just hasn't happened yet. Yeah.
okay. Fine. Okay, Dr. Rasnick. You
Yeah,
have 15 minutes.
I can't let that stay where it is. The reason I bring up the HIV is because that was 30 years, over 30, almost 4 decades of preparation for what we're going through right now. How you can get away with things by just saying that they exist. Those HIV, to this day, there's no HIV test. When Jack was saying they could test it for HIV, there is no HIV test. To this day, they use the antibody test. Again, this is before PCR, and they explicitly say in those antibody tests that there is no recognized reference standard, meaning there's no virus itself to compare it to. And they say the antibody test cannot be used to diagnose the presence of HIV or even used to diagnose a person with AIDS. There is no test on the market for either HIV or AIDS. Now that's important because so that goes against what Jack was just saying, that they actually they tested people for HIV. No, that's never happened. There is no test for HIV. That's crucial to know that. We've had that now for 30 years. Now here we are after 6 months, we're talking about a test, a genetic test for this new coronavirus. With this long history of genetic tests that do not exist for HIV. Why all of a sudden is the public faced with global catastrophe should the public sit back and swallow and say, yes, we are happy and safe and we believe that your genetic test is really telling us the truth. It's too important not to argue and debate this.
Thank you. So basically you're saying, if I understand it, you're agreeing with what Dr. Weiler said in terms of purification of this new strain of coronavirus has not been done, and Koch's postulates have not been followed. Would that be clear?
I agree with that. Okay. That's true. That's also true with HIV, by the way.
Now,
also true with HPV. There's a history here. There's a pattern here of virus after virus after virus. Now that the stage has been set, so now the precedent is there. You can keep making the same mistake over and over again, and that leads to the tragedy that we're experiencing right now.
I have to go back on one thing on what you said about you saying there's no HIV tests. There's no tests, as you said, but I think you may mean that the tests that they have are not reliable, because I know the tests.
No, that's true. They're not reliable.
Right.
That's true.
The test inserts for HIV tests all say that their test should not be used alone for determining whether somebody has HIV and AIDS.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Oh, okay.
It's much simpler than that. It's much simpler than that.
Okay.
There is no test for HIV, period. All right? The test were originally, the antibody tests were to protect the blood supply. And they were never, ever changed from that purpose. But they have been used for other purposes that they were not approved for by the FDA.
Okay.
All right?
Okay. That clarifies that, because they have the tests out there, but they're not being used properly for HIV.
Yeah, there's no test that is registered with the FDA for HIV, antibody, viral load, and the same thing is true for hepatitis C. And the same thing is true for this new coronavirus.
Okay, Dr. Weiler, one last round on this question.
Yeah, last round on this is then there's a lot of people out there that are breaking the law. HIV RNA PCR tests, just go to Google. The tests are there and they're advertised as HIV RNA by PCR tests. STD.com, STD check has.
Something's happening with
I know they say that. Read the package insert, what the FDA mandates.
Something's happening. We lost
website that does. What I'm saying is if the FDA does not approve of its use for testing HIV, there's a lot of people that are breaking the law.
That's
because they're
absolutely right. I
Okay, so
agree with that.
okay, so the polymerase chain reaction for HIV does work. What you're saying is that through some process, the FDA failed to approve these tests because there was no ground truth about, well, that goes to the core question here. How do you detect a virus? How does the CDC know their test is any good if they're the first one to invent the test? What do they compare it to? There's never an absolute truth, and that's why what the German team did was so brilliant. The German team actually spiked sputum samples with the coronavirus, copies of the coronavirus RNA molecule. They made true positives in the lab. They're synthetic true positive samples, so they can do the full ROC curve. And I know you're aware of that. I know you're aware of. I read your comments on how they should reduce the false positives by altering the number of cycles on the PCR for the cutoff. And they also tested against negative samples that were completely negative. They had no symptoms of coronavirus. There were just people without any symptoms of respiratory illness. And then they tested their samples against other viruses. They showed 100% pathogen specificity. They showed a very high sensitivity. I think it was over 95%, and 100% specificity. My point is, the CDC did nothing of the sort. They've never tested their own tests, so how can they validate it? And so here we sit in the United States of America with the largest epidemic. We are the center of the epidemic now in the world. We have more cases than anyone else per capita. We have more deaths than anyone else per capita, I believe, and that are attributed. And I know that there's a lot of phony data going into that, but nevertheless, the diagnostics, the laboratory confirmed diagnoses are the highest in the world. And we sit in America trying to understand something like a virus that's transmitted from person to person, from country to country, comes in on airplanes, infects new people, infects new populations, using a public health infrastructure that is corrupt and that is broken. The CDC screwed us. The CDC messed up their test and has led to all of this confusion. And guess what? Pharma, CDC, totalitarian, they win. If it's a stalemate, they win from confusion. And my point is, let's get it straight here. The virus exists. There are tests that exist that could detect it. It's just a regulatory snafu that there's no HIV-approved test. If I was the director of the HIV, I guess, of the FDA, I guess one of the things that I would do is I would approve of this and make it validate the test for clinical use and for private use.
Okay, yeah, we're over time. A question I have for Dr. Weiler, then I'll throw the question at Dr. Rasnick. Dr. Weiler, you mentioned you showed up an image of the HIV PCR test. Are you familiar with Dr. Gary Mullis, Nobel Prize winner?
Yes, the late Kary Mullis. I am very familiar with his work. PCR was invented during my graduate school days. So
here's my question. Are you familiar with the fact that Kary Mullis himself was critical of his PCR test being used to test HIV, test for viruses? He's been very critical and outspoken that it shouldn't be used in that way. What's your thoughts on his comments about his test for which he won the Nobel Prize on?
My thoughts are, and Kary Mullis certainly did deserve the Nobel Prize for his LSD-induced realization of how we could actually amplify DNA in the lab. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. My thought is I could teach every one of you in the lab how to use PCR to isolate viruses from your own body, that if you had an infection. All right, I could teach everyone. If I gave you a vial of somebody that had the influenza virus, I could teach you how to make a PCR test to amplify the genome of that virus. And your test would be better than the CDC's test for coronavirus, because there's a formula, it's a recipe. It's like baking a cake. It is so simple to make an accurate PCR test. I am dumbfounded how the CDC messed up so much. Kary Dr. Mullis had his opinion about it. I'm not sure if he was talking about the fact that, PCR was designed for use in DNA, and for mRNA viruses, it might be difficult. Now we have reverse transcriptase PCR, and that's the kind of test that we have. But it's really clear that if we have an assay and we could test it, it's the test of the assay that makes it suitable for clinical use. It's not the assay itself.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Rasnick, could you respond, especially if you could start off with the issue of Kerry Mullis, because Kerry Mullis said in multiple statements and interviews that his test was being used incorrectly. Dr. Weiler is basically saying that I guess there's new information on how to look at the test or something, and Kerry Mullis was wrong about his own test. What are your thoughts about that?
Okay, well, Kerry was a good friend of mine. We were buddies. We both went to Georgia Tech, by the way, before he went to University of California at Berkeley. And we met on a number of occasions, and we talked about this stuff. And yeah, he was said on numerous occasions that PCR should not be used for diagnostic purposes, especially for viruses. It's just, its reliability is just not there. It's just a wrong use for it. That's what Kerry told me. Now, unfortunately, Kerry is not with us anymore. He sets people straight right off the bat really well. You know, and I'm not a PCR expert. I'm just telling you what he told me in various trips all over the world together. But let's get a third party in here. This fellow named Stephen Buston. I don't know, Jack, are you familiar with him? He published a paper in 2017 talking the talk, but not walking the walk, about reverse transcriptase qPCR as a paradigm for lack of reproducibility in molecular research. He said the majority of published RT-qPCR data are likely to represent technical noise. And he says you can't even know which, about as good as the toss of a coin, and you don't even know which side of the coin is right.
Yeah, so thanks for addressing that. I'm familiar with that. And like I said, the problem is who's creating the test. I could create a very accurate PCR test, and I could teach everyone on the call how to make and this is my complaint to the CDC and the FDA about the CDC's test. First, you have to find primer sets that amplify well. They're little 21 base, 17 base, 18 base nucleotide stretches of DNA that match your target very well. That they did. CDC did that. I could tell by my analysis. Then you have to make sure that those primer probe sets only amplify the target, and they don't amplify things like fungus, which we have everywhere in our body. They don't amplify things like human genes, that protein coding genes. And if you are accidentally amplifying human proteins encoding genes, then you're going to end up with false positives, no doubt about it, right? And the step that they apparently skipped, and here's the problem, and there's something really fishy about this. The step that they apparently skipped was to take those primer probe sets and test them for specificity to the pathogen they were trying to test for. Well, in 2003, the CDC on the CDC website boasts SARS was not a big deal because we swept in and we brought in our RT-PCR test. We did contact tracing. We created a highly accurate test for SARS. If they could do it in 2003, what did they forget between 2003 and 2019? So that I can't explain. If they knew how to make an accurate test against SARS and they used it, now the real problem is, what we have from CDC is a massive, massive cover-up, and Anthony Fauci's involved in it too, where they messed up on the test and they want to make everybody think that there was some accidental contamination of the lab, and that was a problem, and the contamination of the kits, and that's a problem. But nobody's talking about the real flaws of the test that made them let people go. And I don't mean to hold them in police manner, but they didn't even inform the people who were infected that they were infected. So they couldn't get early medical care, and they didn't have the knowledge to self-isolate. They were going to drop these people off at the mall and let them go on the mall. And the city said, no, we're not interested. You put them in a military base. So if CDC can create an accurate test in 2003 and use it to shut down the SARS epidemic, what did they forget in 2019? I can't explain that.
Dr. Rasnick, last response on this question?
Well, all I can say is that Jack is just painting a very good picture about there's really problems out there, major problems. with this test. He may have the solution to it, but a lot of other people don't. So it seemed to me like the problem is so big. I mean, the crisis is so big that we need something a little bit better than what we've got right now. I think everybody would agree with that.
Okay, next question. Moving on along, some of these we're trying to get through pretty quickly. How serious is this coronavirus epidemic? By that I mean, if we compare, for example, to death by tobacco, according to the Center for Disease Control, close to 500,000 Americans die every year. And heaven knows what the number is worldwide. And I've seen reports indicating that the incidence of deaths and serious injuries from coronavirus is no worse than the common pneumonia, flu outbreaks every year. So could you give us some perspective on how serious coronavirus is? Some people have the perception that it's the worst disease that's ever hit America because America's never taken such extreme steps. But there are others who are saying, look, I mean, we look at the numbers, this is not nearly as bad as other things that we're faced with. So Dr. Weiler?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to take a cue here. I've got a team member apparently pitching answers. I'm reading the comments. Tobacco is not contagious. Okay, tobacco doesn't have an exponential growth in the number of deaths in Sweden or elsewhere. So
let me interrupt you 1 second for that. We all know it's not contagious, but all these politicians who are shutting down the whole country, they can very easily shut down the tobacco industry, and we can save 500,000 lives.
Your point is well taken, and absolutely, we should shut down as much as possible deaths due to tobacco. So, and that goes to the either or thing. A lot of times we say, well, we have a problem here in the United States with death caused by X. Well, it's not as bad as Y, and it's not as bad as Z. And do that for 20 years, and do that for 100 years. And all of a sudden, you've got a huge mortality rate from all these things and that works right into the chemical industry's plan to dump their poisons and their toxins into us. Well, it's not as bad as glyphosate. Can you imagine our grandchildren saying, it's not as bad as glyphosate. Glyphosate kills 180,000 people a year, it's estimated. So let's have more toxins. Let's invite more toxins and poisons and viruses to the party. People care about living. I think, I'm sure everybody knows that. They care about their loved ones. People don't want to die. And so it's no assurance whatsoever, right? If you're diabetic and you're 70 years old, you're right in the crosshairs of high risk of mortality from this virus. You really are not thinking about the fact that somebody had a pail of paint that dropped on their head in New York City. And it killed them. It's irrelevant. I mean, these other courses, it's non sequitur is the technical point. How dangerous is it? Let's go to the numbers. A lot of people have tried to compare this to influenza, and their hands are tied. I've tried to untie their hands because they go to influenza and they say there's 55,000 deaths per year, or 60,000 deaths, or whatever they say from influenza, and that's absolutely not correct. There's about 8% of deaths that are reported by CDC as being due to influenza disease are laboratory confirmed influenza cases that had respiratory illness that contributed to the death. The rest of them are other respiratory illnesses of unknown causes and pneumonia. And those other respiratory illnesses of unknown causes, the vast majority of influenza disease are coronavirus and RSV and other viruses we don't even know about. And other causes of pneumonia. So these people that die from pneumonia, that get a flu diagnosis without laboratory confirmation, they fall into the flu moniker so that CDC can say year after year after year, flu's an epidemic, there's an epidemic of flu. Because if you have a cause of death that's responsible for 7.3% or greater of the total number of deaths in the United States, that's their criteria for an epidemic, which is stupid, of course, because if an asteroid comes and wipes out half the population, all of a sudden nothing's an epidemic except for the asteroid. So mathematically, what we have to do is we have to go back to 2014 and realize that of the 55,000 deaths in 2014, 8.1% were flu, the rest were something else other than flu, and then compare it to the 4,500 that were flu. And in that case, my math tells me it's 12.5 times so far. And this is what's difficult. You're in a situation where there's fluctuating levels of infection and mortality. It's still increasing. You know, we say that we peaked, but I don't see it. I'm not confirmed. It can always go right back up. So until the epidemic is quote unquote over, or until we get a full season or whatever it's going to be, we don't know what the mortality risk is. But at the present time, my last estimate was 12.5 times greater risk of death from COVID-19 infection, if you have the infection, than if you have a flu infection, 12.5 times.
Okay.
But flu is only 4,500 deaths a year. So it's really not a huge, huge big deal.
Okay, it's time. Dr. Rasnick?
Yeah, I don't know, Jack, if you've seen this latest paper, just came out by John Ioannidis. Are you familiar with his work?
I am.
Yeah.
And he's made a critical error in that. He's made the very error I was just talking about in his analysis.
Okay, well, I just want to just read from his paper right here. He analyzed data from Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, Sweden, Switzerland, as well as Louisiana, Michigan, Washington states, and New York City. And as of April 4th, 2020, this month. And here's his conclusion. People under 65 years old have very small risk of COVID-19 death, even in the hotbeds of the pandemic. And deaths for people under 65 years without underlying predisposing conditions are remarkably uncommon.
You want to stop there? Oh, okay, Dr. Weiler?
Okay, so I know John Ioannidis' work, and he's usually extremely good, but he's made some fundamental errors here. First of all, when he's making some assessments here, or at least let me give him credit. Other people have made assessments of his publications, I should say, saying, look, it's just like the flu, going to the 55,000 to 60,000 deaths per year from flu, but there are not 65,000 deaths per year from flu. John's point brings up this idea that if you die with coronavirus, did you die from it? And I'm glad you brought that point up, because for the last 3 years, I've listened to and worked for and worked with and went to the National Vaccine Injury Compensation Program as an expert witness, arguing that were it not for the vaccine, this child would not have died. Were it not for the vaccine, this child would not have had autism. Were it not for the vaccine, this child would not have autoimmunity of any number of types. Now, take that logic and keep that logic in your mind. We know that that's correct. We can say that this child was going on making all of their developmental marks, and then they got the vaccine and they regressed into autism. Now, here's a 70-year-old, 80-year-old person. They have hypertension. They're a smoker. They're on high blood pressure medicine. We have to say, were it not for the virus, would they have died that day? Right? So the error that can be made by some people is to say, well, they had pre-existing conditions, so they were going to die anyway. When? A week, a month, a year, 2 years, 5 years? I don't know. They can't answer that. That's the unknowable. Now, what we've subsequently learned, and I think it's because they've been cooking the books, and I caught them cooking the books on influenza. Literally, their pants are down around their ankles, and they're in the alley on influenza. I'm sorry about the analogy, but they're caught red-handed, okay, cooking the books on influenza. They're going to lose influenza as an epidemic. And I published this on LinkedIn. Now they have to say, oh, anybody that had a coronavirus at all, or anything that looked like coronavirus and they died, we have to call it coronavirus to make up the difference. That's why they're fudging the books. So we're dealing with la-la land in terms of numbers. The CDC's cooking the books, HHS is cooking the books, and John is consuming those numbers. So we have to take a look at the quality of the information he's actually getting. We're both saying it's probably not as bad as it is, but we have to say it is as bad as it is.
Hey, Jack, let me say something real quick. Jack, I want to pat you on the back and applaud you for your work, what you're doing with those vaccines and everything, and the cooking the books and all that. Listen, I totally accept that. I don't quibble with that. The point I was making with Ioannidis here is he was dealing with the data that he was given, you know, and there's data coming from everywhere, you know, and there's and Ioannidis, as you pointed out, he does some really good work, you know, and so I guess the real point here is frankly, we don't know what in the world's going on. The only thing I'm certain of it doesn't warrant shutting the world down.
Right.
Can
I agree completely. I
before
think
you
it's
go,
what my
Dr. Weiler-
message is. It's so
Okay.
important that our side get our representation of reality exactly right in terms of the numbers, right? So if we throw out there, it's just like the flu, and you're talking about flu and influenza, right? Our moderator got it right. He said pneumonia and influenza. He put it together, and I thank you for that.
Yeah. I want to throw out my concerns as I'm listening to this. We are here, you guys were talking about and debating the reliability of the tests. And I think you both agree they're big problems. Now, I know Dr. Weiler, you said some good tests, but there's a lot of problems out there with the tests. And we're using a lot of the tests to create numbers, which they're putting on the nightly news, which is scaring the daylights out of people. And then when we listen to reports coming out, how like 80% of the people who are on respirators die from the respirators, and those numbers are being listed as coronavirus. And we know that we're having people who are elderly, multiple conditions, still listed as corona. There might be an argument for including them as coronavirus deaths, but I know in some countries they are not including people who have pre-existing life-threatening conditions. And if we throw in also the fact that we're now hearing that the hospitals are receiving something like $13,000 for each patient diagnosed as a coronavirus patient, well, that of course creates tremendous incentive for the hospitals to anybody who coughs or sneezes or anything close to a possible coronavirus for them to write them down as coronavirus. And lastly, and I believe in New York, at least getting $39,000 for each person who is placed on a ventilator. So we now have tremendous incentives for the hospitals to cook the books. So if we got tests of questionable reliability, numbers coming out that are from the hospitals where they have an incentive to steer the numbers one way, plus the CDC's own guidelines have basically told the hospitals that on the death certificates, they don't have to prove that the person died of coronavirus. They can pretty much write down, say that it could be a hunch, and that would be good enough. And Del Bigtree went into great details on the lack of reliability of the death certificates. So basically, with all of these unknowns, I would agree with both of you. I don't know what's going on, and how do we begin to even assess how many people really do have coronavirus and have gotten sick from it and died from it? How do we begin to assess where the reality is? Whoever likes to start.
I've got 2 quick points. The first is, this is part of the reason why I'm promoting, or was promoting until nobody wanted to hear it anymore, that you have private testing available if you want it, just for your own knowledge, so that you know what's going on with your medical condition, so you don't have a medical doctor telling you. I recently had somebody close to me in my life try to commit suicide, and she told the people that put her in the place for care afterwards, as it was a failed attempt, call Jack and let him know that it wasn't coronavirus if I die. Okay, so this is infused in everyone's minds that the establishment is biasing everything towards coronavirus. You brought up the second point is that brought up the ventilator deaths. The pathophysiology of this virus is unlike SARS, and it differs from SARS in the following way. SARS only infects the peripheral epithelial cells of the alveolar sacs. The first layer of the cells, not to the peripheral. And this virus weakens the tissue in your lungs to the point where it's like tissue paper by going all the way to the periphery. It's very unusual. The radiological assays on this talk about glassy opacities, a very characteristic difference between SARS and other pneumonia and SARS-CoV-2. So we are now learning that if you use the ventilators, as is done by an algorithm, you check the book, you say, this is the pressure that you use. You do individualized medicine with ventilators anymore. You do a test. You're supposed to do a test run first on the patient. Here, they're just going ventilate, ventilate, ventilate. They do everybody the same way, and they're blowing out their lungs. because the tissue, so the word on the street is change the protocol so that you have more oxygen and less pressure. But it would be far more advantageous to use high dose vitamin C, other things that we know are working, and antivirals for those who it appears it might be helpful. Dr. Brownstein, of course, has, my final point is Dr. Brownstein, of course, has a protocol where he's had over 100 patients and he's treated them with a regimen of vitamins. I interviewed him on my show on Breaking Science, a regimen of high dose vitamin D, A, and C, and some ozone therapy. And he's not lost a single patient. It seems like the small clinics are not losing COVID-19 patients. It's the mainstream medicine, the large medical corporations that are losing the patients.
Great. Dr. Rasnick, would you like to respond?
Yeah, just one quick question for Jack is technical. And I read your 2020 paper, and I noticed you said you found high local homology over short segments of their epitopes, meaning the coronavirus epitope and the human proteins. All right.
Right.
That implies there's high local homology over short segments of RNA, right?
No, it's the DNA of humans compared to RNA from the virus.
But it's for the same protein, right? It's messenger RNA, right?
It's protein coding genes that are mRNA encoded in the virus compared to other protein coding genes, different genes with different functions and different structures in humans. Yeah,
I totally grant you that, but there is homology in these short segments of RNA, right?
Yeah, sure.
Right. How do those little short segments in RNA affect the PCR test? Because the PCR tests for these things, first of all, you're only talking about short segments, do these tests. So where does the probability come in that you're looking just by accident, you're going to find short segments homology and start ramping up, magnifying up the PCR result on human RNA?
Okay, so I understand the question now. So the pathogenic priming paper actually describes homology in the protein level. So I did the comparisons at the protein level. If you look at the table, it's not nucleotide sequence homology, it's protein level homology. And as you know, you can have large differences in nucleotide sequence divergence, but still have similar proteins due to convergent evolution. And this is exactly the point about PCR tests, and that I said earlier. You have to screen computationally. If you're going to make primers, you have to say, here's a primer that matches the virus, and then you take that same exact primer and then you compare it to the host. If you don't do that last step, you're going to get the problem you're talking about, which is non-specific off-target amplification. And that's what I wrote to the FDA. I said, these guys have really messed up their test because we have no reliability that they're not going to get a bunch of false positives. But it turns out also you can end up with false negatives through something called primer dimerism. If you're not amplifying the virus and you screen out the PCR products that match humans computationally. So it depends on who's analyzing the data, but you're exactly right.
Okay,
thank you.
We're going to be opening this up to, not just yet, in a few moments to everybody. So anybody but actually questions. There's two last questions for you.
Yeah, I wanted to answer your other question to me.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sure. You said, what should we do, right?
Oh, right, yes.
Right,
okay.
Well, the first thing I would do is pressure governments to open up the world. Let us get back to work. Think about these things rationally, and then we can deal with it. But right now, we're going crazy. We don't have answers to very, very important questions, but we're letting the world just fall apart. That's what I would say. We got to put the world back on track again.
Well, that was my question. The question was, is this lockdown necessary or is it too extreme? Has any hard scientific evidence been produced to show that social distancing works? I mean, I know there's some theories, but is there hard evidence? So you want to elaborate a little bit, but I think your position is too extreme. You want to elaborate any more before I go to Dr. Weiler?
They're throwing this crap out on us right now for no justification at all. It's pie in the sky.
Okay, Dr.
It ought to
Wheeler?
stop
Weiler?
immediately. There's no justification for it.
Okay, Dr. Weiler?
Okay, so I described earlier a solution that I had conducted through modeling and simulations. Because CDC screwed up their test so bad and it got out of hand, we can't do contact tracing. That's the problem. In 2003, they contributed to bringing SARS under control. This time they screwed it up so bad we can't do contact tracing. At this point in time, the solution that my mind tells me makes a great deal of sense is to empower individual citizens to know their status privately. The reason why individual citizens knowing their status, independent of their employer, independent of the government, independent of anyone, it's just like a pregnancy test, would then allow people to make individual rational decisions that would reduce the rate of spread of COVID-19 and reduce the risk of exposure to the at-risk groups. There are people who are arguing that we should lock down the at-risk people instead of the whole population. And what we have is no plan right now. There's no plan. The United States is all over the map. Some states are doing this, some states are doing that. People are violating. Businesses are supposed to be closed in Pennsylvania. They're still open. Okay, so we're doing literally basically nothing. And I think it would be, at this point in time, the only logical solution that I could think of is to use a test, and I have no financial relationship with this company. I want to let you know. Use a test by Vibrant America when it becomes available for home use. Vibrant America has a 99% specific, 99% sensitive, 100% pathogen specific antibody test that will tell you your IgG and your IgM status. IgG status being, well, you probably have an active or a very recent infection because you have the antibodies where you're fighting off that specific infection, and it is very, very specific to COVID-19. And so you might want to consider that in you're making your decisions about how you go about your day. That's what I'm fighting for. And it also tells you if you may be immune. Now, we can always say, well, we don't know if the immunity lasts. Well, why would we not expect it to not last? We would expect it to last just like everything else, except for the cold. Well, this is a coronavirus, so it goes away. But at least in terms of immediately bringing down the numbers, if that's your goal, there are other people that argue that we should just let everybody out, just go and infect each other. We'll deal with the mortality. Well, I happen to be engaged to a woman who may have a 6.3% mortality risk. She has diabetes, and I'd like her not to die. So I'd like to know my own status, and I'd like to know the status. I'd like to know my own status so I know how to behave myself. So I have less of a chance of bringing it home to her, especially if I'm immune. So I think self-isolation is what we should do. We should respect personal autonomy and give guidance to people and families on how to handle this. Not lockdown, not rules, not legislation, no penalties. Nobody should be arrested. All of that crap needs to go away now. It needs to stop now. If that stuff doesn't stop now, we're going to end up with a situation where we have violence over this. And that the day that this leads to violence, then the terrorists who have made this worse, I've won. And that's a bad day.
Okay, so I'm not sure I understand you. So you're saying you favor testing, right, Dr. Weiler?
Specific, in-home, private, nobody gets to see the test result except for you, testing.
Okay, but if somebody...
And if you don't want to test, you don't test.
Okay,
Right.
If you take the test and you want to use it to get a job, well, you can't really use it for licensing, so it's not going to help you.
It has nothing to do with my proposal.
Okay, and within terms that you say, well, they can make decisions on how they can conduct themselves in what? Do what? Okay, so let's say I test positive.
Okay,
how would that, okay.
So some of my friends are thin, some are obese. I know that obesity is a risk factor for coronavirus. If I have an active infection and one of my friends is thin and doesn't have diabetes and isn't on ACE2 inhibitors and is not over 70, they're not in the risk group for mortality, I'll probably go visit them and say, hey, I'm a little sick, it might be coronavirus, do you mind? And they'll say, yeah, sure. I might not even mention the test result. But for somebody who's obese and is on ACE2 inhibitors, and I know that they're, or if they are diabetic, and I know my status, and I willfully bring an active infection to my friend's house, and I know they're at risk, wow, I'm an asshole.
Well, I have to say, I was involved a lot in the questioning HIV test a long time ago, and I'm really confused. I mean, hopefully you can help me out with understanding how do you interpret the results of a test, because I remember a long time ago, and the idea is that if you're exposed to a virus, you develop antibodies. And that's the whole basis for the vaccines. So if I take a shot against measles, I should develop antibodies, and I'll always test positive. Testing positive is a good thing, or has been a good thing. Is that correct?
You're talking about vaccination, or you're talking about infection?
Well, I'm talking about vaccination right now. The logic behind vaccines is if you've been exposed to a particular disease, you develop lifelong immunity. So
If there was I'm going to say something controversial to that. If there was a
Okay.
coronavirus vaccine that was made today, it would probably be reasonably effective. It might cause very, very bad situation 2 years from now if another coronavirus comes through the population through pathogenic priming. But because the pathogen that's circulating right now will be well matched to the vaccine, it might be reasonably effective. I'm
Okay,
not saying I'm
okay.
advocating it.
Okay, I just want
I
to
did calculations on the CDC's pediatric schedule, and there are 6 or 7, I can't remember which, vaccines right now that have outlasted, that they've expired. Their molecular expiration date has expired. They're too diverse. They've evolved far enough away from the vaccine stock that you're going to get problems like original antigenic sin. There's not a good match between the vaccine and the virus. No, the antibodies don't mean a thing for immunity.
Okay, so when somebody takes an at-home test, as you would recommend, and it says that they're positive, how should that person feel? Should they feel that, okay, I'm positive, and so that means I was exposed to it, I've gotten over it, and I'm okay? Or should they feel, I'm positive, oh my God, I might infect other people? How should they feel?
Okay, good, great question. So to boil this down, if you test positive for one of the antibodies, it means you have an active infection or a recent active infection. And in that case, that person probably doesn't want to go to that birthday party, probably doesn't want to go to that large event, right? And,
Okay.
and because of coronavirus and this situation, I think employers are going to have 2-week sick periods if this thing doesn't go away. If this stays in our population, we're going to have to tolerate changes in employment law so that you say, hey, I got to use my 2-week sick period. You don't have to tell, under my plan, you don't have to tell your employee why. You're entitled to two 2-week periods of where you're sick for 14 days, and you can work from home or whatever. The other situation that you mentioned was the other type of antibody that if you have it, you are now presumed to be immune. And doctors are saying that they want to have the antibody test so that they can feel comfortable not putting on all the PPEs, and they can go ahead and they can treat a ton of patients quickly, and they would feel like a superhero because it's been lifted. If I am thought to be immune because of the antibody test, then I'm going to relax because I presume I'm not going to be a carrier. I presume that I'm not going to infect Grace and so on. So there's two different aspects to the antibody test. One tells you that you are likely immune. The other one tells you you have an active infection. How should people react was your question. This is where the beauty of the IPAC Back to Plan comes in. That's up to you. You're an American citizen. You should, based on, if you feel like you have a fever, you take your temperature. You don't register that with your employer. You don't register it with the government. If you're a woman and you think you're pregnant, you take an EPT test. You don't register that with anyone unless you seek medical care for a pregnancy. And then they're going to test you again anyway. Same thing here. You go to the drugstore, you get your test, you take your test, you make up your mind on what you're going to do for your circumstances, for the people that you're going to interact with, your choice. And then if you seek medical care because you're positive, well, geez, if you're positive and you have an active infection and you're in a risk group, you might want to get some medical care at a small facility, a small clinic.
Thank you. Dr. Rasnick, could you wrap up on this, and then we'll pretty much be ready to open up to everybody.
Well, I'm ready to open it up to questions. I mean, we've talked to each other enough, right?
Well, I think it would be valuable to respond to that because Dr. Weiler is basically saying that people should take the test.
Okay. All right. I will comment then.
Okay.
I, for one, am against testing, period. I remember with the AIDS era and all the HIV testing that was going on. And I grant you, this is different from HIV. I grant you that. But it's something I learned, and it's valuable information, that a positive result on HIV destroyed people's lives because you were told that you could never, it did not provide you immunity. You're eventually going to come down with the horrible diseases and die. That was the AIDS era. And one of the horrific components of this is that there are documented, last I looked, over 80 different ways that you could have a false positive antibody test to HIV that had nothing to do with HIV. You know, flu vaccination, for example, arthritis, pregnancy, a whole bunch of things, over 80 of these things for HIV that you would come back positive for, possibly. All right. Now, the other thing about these tests, especially these genetic tests that are going on right now, where people drive by and they swab you and take the DNA looking to see if you're positive for the virus. Guess what? Your DNA goes into government databases. It's not just the viral DNA that they're looking at. They're storing your data in government databases. That's not a good thing for a free society. And it's not going to do you any good anyway.
Well, I couldn't agree anymore that your data should not go to the government. That's why I'm advocating private testing, 100% private. Yeah.
Last very fast question, and then we're opening it up. Face masks. All across the country, people are wearing face masks to cross the street to go to their local store. From what I'm hearing, face masks, especially the ones the average person is buying, is not effective against a virus. I mean, assuming you believe in virus, I know there's some debates on whether viruses are the cause of disease, but I think both of you agree that viruses are causal agents sometimes. How effective is that, those little masks with people wearing handkerchiefs over their nose and mouth against a virus? And also, Dr. Rasnick, when we were talking by phone, said that most people don't know that a virus would enter more likely through the eyes and the tear duct. And now there are reports pointing out that the face masks are actually harming people because they're breathing back in their own carbon dioxide. They're not getting enough fresh air, plus whatever material they're placing over their face, that's going into their lungs and everything else. So real quickly, should people wear masks? Or rather, are these general face masks and scarves that people wearing, are they effective against viruses or not? And especially if we take into account that every picture that we're seeing of the governors and the mayors, they're not wearing masks. Here in New York, Governor Cuomo, he takes lots of photographs and does lots of interviews inside buildings, outside buildings, no mask. President Trump, no mask. Mayor de Blasio, no mask. But people, they look at you funny if you're walking down the street without a mask. So is the fear or about necessity of wearing masks, is that justified? Do they protect you? Do they harm you? They are necessary? Are they really important? Can you just give a quick answer to each of you, then we'll open up?
Yeah, the masks do no health, they have no health benefits. That's clear. But that's not why people are told to wear them. They're told to wear them to develop herd behavior, to get people in line. I mean, it's just part of this whole thing to see how much you can control people and see how long they will go along with it. But as you brought up, when they did these trials on volunteers for flu virus and things like that, they administered the virus to their eye. You know, because your eye, your tear ducts is one of the principal avenues for viral infection. So even if you might keep from spewing stuff out through the mask, although viruses can easily go through the mask, they're that tiny, but you certainly aren't protecting yourself from virus because your eyes are open.
Thank you, Dr. Weiler. Quick response.
That's right. So like all these issues on coronavirus, this has been an evolving topic. The original reason why people were told don't buy masks is because the medical community wanted them all for themselves. The N95 mask cannot filter a virus that's smaller than 95 microns. So Dr. Rasnick's correct that it's not going to stop the transmission if you breathe in N95 mask. Part of, I'm sorry?
It's just somebody's wasn't
Okay.
unmuted.
So
Okay.
yeah, if you breathe in air that contains the virus, the N95 mask is not capable of filtering it. The only possible benefit is if you're coughing, that it's going to restrict, the distance from which your expirat's going to go, the droplets. And given that we think that you can catch this virus from the air, that there might be a reduction in the transmission. And I think that that's probably why they're recommending mask usage, is to further flatten out the curve. Flattening the curve is the wrong thing. We should either truncate it or let everybody out and have herd immunity take place and let natural selection take over. Those are the only two options. I just think if we are going to let people out, individual people might be empowered to make intelligent decisions about who they expose themselves to, and themselves if they're at risk. So the masks themselves, you know, there is, I agree that there with Dr. Rasnick that there's a herd mentality, there's a conformity to this. And as an individualist myself, I don't like to do it, but we have to going to the store. We have to wear them going to the store now, so I put one on.
Great. So I guess, Dawn, if you can hear me, I guess we're ready to open up the mic so people can ask their questions.
Can I take a break?
I guess, yeah.
1 minute break?
Yeah, feel free. I'll give a few guidelines for those who want to ask questions. Please avoid giving a speech. Please try to give a concise question, and so that the speakers have more time to share their knowledge. And yeah,
can I make a recommendation?
Go ahead.
Have people type that they're raising their hand, and then you can unmute them one at a time.
Yes, that's just what I was going to pipe
Okay,
in.
fine.
Well, we
fine.
actually have a raise hand feature too. If people know how to use it, they can just click on that and the hand will go up. But
Could you give people some guidance on that, where to look for the raising of the hand? Okay, I don't see it on my screen.
So if you click at the bottom where those 3 dots are, I think, is that right, Don?
Click on participants.
Okay, yeah, click on participants, and then and you choose your name, right? Yes. So if I click on my name, it says raise hand or rename. So I just click raise hand, and it, like I'm doing right now, and my hand's up now.
Brian, I also want to let you know, I was just kicked out, so I lost the entire chat. We had quite a few questions in the chat as well.
Oh, wow.
Okay, I am still seeing the chat, and I will read the questions one by one. But do you want to let the live people go first?
Yes.
Okay,
right.
and before you go, the speakers, as before, please try to keep your responses to around 3 minutes. I know you can go over, let you guys go over a bit, but please try to keep it concise, because if you give a 10-minute presentation, we're not going to cover as many people.
Sure. So we're going to start with CT1. I'm going to unmute you, and you can ask your question rather.
Hi, is Dr. Rasnick back?
I am.
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Thank you both. I just really sincerely appreciate the conversation. It's so helpful. Dr. Rasnick, I am wondering, do you believe that there is some kind of medical phenomena happening right now, that there are people in the hospital, that there are reports of what looks to be like a glass lung or something similar? Do you think that there is something going on? And if so, if you don't feel that it's viral necessarily, what, in your medical mind, what questions would you start to ask what questions would you ask to find out what might be going on, and areas to pursue to come up with ideas of what might be happening? Thank you.
Okay. I think that something is going on in New York City, Manhattan probably especially. I don't know that for a fact. It's sort of this anecdotal stuff that I've been following. I know here in North Carolina, where I'm at, most other places, I'm in communication with people around the world, and basically not much is happening. The hospitals are empty. Oddly enough, they're empty in most places because they've shut down non-essential type of medical treatment, surgeries and things like that. They're even laying healthcare workers off in some places because they made room just for this onslaught of coronavirus patients, which just hasn't happened, except apparently in New York. And I say apparently because that's what you sort of see in the newspapers, and frankly, I don't trust them, but you know, I can't just discount the possibility that something is going on. I strongly doubt that it is viral, though. I strongly, strongly doubt that. There's other possibilities, you know, physical things, contamination, who knows? I don't know. There was, decades ago, there was, I forget what it was called in Japan, where they thought they had an infectious agent epidemic. It was in Peter Duesberg's book, Inventing the AIDS Virus. And they went on and on, I guess, for weeks or months, thinking it was an infectious disease, a pandemic, and it turned out it was an environmental toxic poison of some sort that was causing all the problems. So just because there's something going on, certainly still it's with the old people now, you have to remember that, it not necessarily has anything to do with an infectious agent. And along those lines about the age, there's something very, very interesting here. There's virtually no documented cases of deaths in people below 10 years old. Now think about that. From 0 to 1, infants are very susceptible to upper respiratory diseases and things, and they have a reasonably significant mortality rate, but it's not zero yet, you know. And apparently, with it, they're very hardy and don't die from this coronavirus. So I don't have a good solid answer for you. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
I guess next question. We can't hear you, Dawn. You're mute.
I'm not seeing anybody else using the raise your hand feature. Does anybody else in here have questions? Because we have quite a few in the chat that we can go back through. No other questions?
They may not know how to use the raise your hand feature.
If you don't know how to raise your hand, if you just type raise hand, that would be
Linda
effective.
DiFrancesco has a question. Linda,
Perfect.
can you unmute yourself?
I just unmuted her.
Yes, thank you. I just was wondering, and I would like to do the antibody test, and I appreciate what Dr. Weiler said about the home one. I don't know how long that's going to take to come out. I wondered about the accuracy of just going to Quest Lab, say, and getting a test. And if I were to do that, would my information no longer be private, I guess?
Yeah, I think all Quest laboratory assays have to go through a physician. I may be wrong about that, or someone who is licensed to order a test for you. The independent testing that I'm talking about is not yet approved by the FDA. The FDA specifically does not allow private testing for coronavirus, and how soon that will change all depends on you. I mean, there's nobody else in the United States of America has contacted the FDA about testing. Our community, and only our community, has contacted the FDA and saying, we want it like this. Everybody else is going, please, CDC, FDA, save us, right? And what I want people to understand is if we win the fight over independent testing, it guts mandatory testing. There's no point to mandatory testing if you just get your own test. And it therefore guts the immunity card. And then it guts the mandatory vaccine. Because if you know that you're immune, imagine all of us in the vaccine risk aware movement. What I want to see is in 2021, people showing up and saying, I'm here today and I don't have my immunity card because I've refused to carry it because I am immune. I took the test back in the last month, or I took it every month up for the last 10 months. At mass consumption, these tests come down really, really cheap, about $10 each. Think of the price of an EPT. So people have consistently misinterpreted that I'm for testing in a way that would empower the other side. And that's a bit like saying, that we want to have forced labor. And I'm saying, no, we need to stand up against forced labor. And then somebody's saying, Well, you know, if you tell them that you want to get paid for your labor, then they're going to get the idea of forced labor. I'm dumbfounded by that. But no, I don't think you can just go and get an antibody test. But if you do, please email me if you can, so I'm better educated, and I will look up the specific test so we will confine together the accuracy, sensitivity, and specificity of the test, because everybody and their brother is trying to throw a test together. And I think, you know, I've seen the tech specs for Vibrant America, and they are stunningly accurate. Very, very good science behind it in terms of accuracy.
Thank
So
you, for that,
if
Jack.
I could just to clarify, so like my daughter went to her doctor, ordered the test for her and said he would order it for me. It's a naturopath. So if I get, when she finds out that information, if I share that with you, you would give some feedback?
Yeah, I'll be happy to comment on the test, not on your daughter's case. So, because I'm not a medical doctor.
Oh, absolutely.
But there's one workaround on this that Dr. Theron Hutton was on Unbreaking Science with us, and he said that he's made a form for testing with antibody tests for coronavirus, and it says on the form that they want their results to be anonymous, and if you sign it, then he doesn't have to report it. The type of thing that happens to a small clinic if you get a coronavirus patient is horrible. If you get a positive test, it would shut down your small clinic completely. You're done. You're out of business. So these small clinics don't want to do testing where they have to report either. I want to cut out the middleman completely. I want this to be consumer's choice. Let profitable capitalism and market demand drive the production of millions of tests where people can go and get it if they want, don't get it if you don't want it. And I think the timeline there depends on us, you know, contacting our legislators and saying that they need to tell the FDA to change it so that, yeah, anybody can be tested and keep the results private. I think that would have changed the HIV situation too a lot. If your HIV things, this is before HIPAA, we already have HIPAA protections. So, but you don't want it in your medical record. If it's in your medical record, it could be, you know, subpoenaed and crap like that. So you want to keep all your private information totally private.
Yeah, that's why I just want to get clarification on something. I'm sure you're aware of the report from the World Health Organization, which is saying that just because you test positive doesn't mean that you can't still become infected. So we'd like to know your thoughts and Dr. Raskin's on the fact of basically saying whether you test or not, I mean, you're still going to be vaccinated. And also, I'm a little confused, maybe either both of you can help me understand this better. It seems like what some officials are saying is if you test negative, that means you're vulnerable to become infected, and therefore everybody who tests negative should go get a vaccine. And also, everybody who's positive, well, that's not a guarantee that you can't be infected, so you should go get a vaccine also. I'm a little confused on that. I would like if each of you could just respond to that briefly.
I will go very quickly on the World Health Organization. If you were trying to mandate vaccines to every human being in the world, what would you say about coronavirus if there was no science that existed that said, yeah, once you're infected, you're probably not going to be infected again? The people that have been infected again have either have a latency of an infection where it really didn't go away, and they developed a problem with their immune system, which this virus may in fact cause, or it's a problem with the test, or it's, you know, they did get reinfected. The World Health Organization is very incentivized to, and the expression that we have in Western Pennsylvania is, isn't that convenient? Isn't it convenient that they don't know whether you can be, right? But all the, let's look at it the way that they look at it. There are very rare circumstances where we have seen case reports where people have received a second diagnosis, I'll say it that way. But it's not clear that it's a reinfection at all. So they're arguing from ignorance, and they're abusing the public once again with their MO, saying there's no study that's ever shown. And isn't that convenient for somebody that's trying to force a vaccine on you?
Yeah, Dr. Rasnick?
Yeah, my generation, I'm 72, the baby boomer generation, born in 48, grew up in the 50s and the 60s. They didn't have all these vaccines. Guess what? We're one of the healthiest generations ever. The current generations I really feel very, very bad for the young people, the brand new little babies and teenagers and people like that have been vaccinated up to yin yang. They're not nearly as healthy as we are. So based on that alone, I'm opposed to vaccines. That right there. I have a lot of other arguments against them that I've learned over the years about how harmful they are and how non-beneficial they are, and all those other arguments. The best argument that I tell people, though, is that we are healthier. The generation that grew up without vaccines are much healthier than the people that are getting 20 or 30 different kind of vaccines, you know, which is nuts. So I'm opposed to vaccines. I'm opposed to testing. I'm opposed to vaccines. You know when you're sick. When you're sick, go to a doctor. When you're not sick, stay away.
Very good. Next question.
So Lisa is next. Lisa, I'm going to lower your hands and unmute you. Go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
Oh, okay. Thank you. A couple things. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I completely agree with what the doctor said regarding vaccines. I see that his generation is far healthier than mine or my children's or the younger generations I work with. And so I have two questions and one comment. So I'm in one of the supposed hot spots in New York. And fortunately, everyone I know who has had this, which is a very small handful, and most people I know are in New York, have fully recovered, and are doing perfectly fine. No one was, a couple of people were pretty sick, but no one has had any kind of fatalities or anything. So for me, the numbers being so high in New York based on where I am and the people I know and the so few people I know who have had it and even fewer that have been so serious, it doesn't make sense just from my own experiences. And now my questions are, one, can this be like the flu or it can mutate? And if that's the case, wouldn't it be parallel if the vaccination?
Can't hear her.
Broke off at the end
We
there.
lost you, Lisa.
At all. And then my second question is
Lisa, can you actually go back?
regarding the masks in New York.
Lisa, we actually
Yes.
you came in and out, so we actually missed your first question. We just heard about comparison to the flu and then you tapered off.
Oh, so should I, all right, I'll try again. So in terms of the comparison to the flu, if a vaccine is coming out for this and they're going to mandate it like they're trying to mandate the flu vaccine, if this mutates, how would this new vaccine that they're coming out with fare, considering that the flu mutates? We don't know if this mutates, and the flu vaccine is only minimally effective, if at all, and quite dangerous. So that would be my first question about the mutation and then vaccination. My second question is, New York has mandated since Friday at 8 p.m. that everyone go out without with masks on, and you're not allowed into stores unless you have these masks. And governments are now making decisions, and everything I've read has said that the masks are more harmful than they are helpful. So my question to the doctors are, are governments making decisions based on science, protective health, or fear? And then my last question is chloroquine and hydrochloroquine, especially in I've read, especially in combination with zithromax and zinc, or high dose vitamin C, IV or orally, are very, very effective in treating this disease. In fact, one of the people I know was in their 80s, comorbid conditions, got a hold of hydrochloroquine, and within 2 hours was 80% better and is fully recovered within 3 to 5 days. Yet these medications and these protocols are banned in New York and not very accessible in the country. And I also see that there is no promotion of immune support that can also help, such as, or that I've read can help, such as vitamin D, vitamin A, zinc, NAC. And these are very inexpensive options and can be very easily accessible. And I'm curious as to why the doctors what they think about these protocols and why they think the governments are not making them accessible for doctors to give these to patients. And instead, we're making people suffer. There could be more fatalities, or we're jumping to extreme measures such as intubation. Thank you.
All right, I'll go very quickly. It depends on the vaccine. The mRNA vaccine itself can be reprogrammed in real time to match locally circulating viruses. That's why Anthony Fauci and the others are very excited about it, because if in Seattle you can have one type of the virus, and in Florida you can have another type, being the predominant virus, or you can have 2 or 3 types, and they can actually distribute per type. This is an experimental vaccine. That is the wrong virus to test the type of vaccine on, because it's likely to cause pathogenic priming. I'm done with that question. The mask question we dealt with before, and in the interest of time, yes, the governments are making decisions, and you have a responsibility as an American citizen, as a citizen of the state of New York, to participate in your own governance. If there's something that you don't like that the government's doing, you have to contact your representatives, and you have to tell them to knock it off. If it comes to protests, then you have to protest. And if your protest is to get arrested because you want to go to the store and buy anything without wearing a mask, and you refuse to leave the store, then go ahead and do that if that's what you want to do. We need to tell them that no, their tactics are not based on any science. I have yet seen any real science over the efficacy of masks. The hydroxychloroquine and the immune support, way back in, I think it was February now, middle February, I wrote an article on what we need to do. And part of it was bring on the hydroxychloroquine and do the immune support. I've been advocating for that from the beginning. Anything that shuts down the virus's ability to develop high viremia in the body and become transmissible it should be explored. And it is a crying shame that now the studies that they've seen 2 studies done on the North American continent that are basically fake science. The fake science that show after you correct for this factor and that factor and that factor, then hydroxychloroquine either is not effective or the outcome's worse on ventilators, with small sample sizes. So the sentiment of your questions 4 and 5 are exactly right. We need to support therapeutics. And again, I would say take your fight to your legislators, demand that they actually say, sure, free reign. And I'm a little confused why governors of states actually believe that they can restrict the practice of medicine that's regulated by the FDA in the first place. They have no business doing it. They are not the commander in medicine. They're commander in chief of medicine.
Yeah,
in the state of Michigan, the governor, said that she was going to revoke the license of doctors who actually used an FDA-approved drug off-label, which is perfectly legal under the current regulations. So she needs to at least be educated about the restrictions of her power, and she's made a terrible mistake there. So thank you for bringing those questions up.
Weiler, I'd like to interject for a second. One thing we forgot really to deal with is how easily is this coronavirus transmitted? Now, keep in mind, Dr. Rasnick has basically argued that he's not seen compelling evidence that this is a virus. So we've got to keep that in mind. And I think you both agree that they've not obtained a purified sample and they've not followed cautious postulates, but there's another argument that all the things they're doing creates validity for the virus. Based on the science that's out there right now, how easily, let's assume there is a coronavirus, just for a moment, how easily is it transmitted? I mean, there are people right now who believe that if you're just standing in an elevator with someone and you're just breathing normally and you're not coughing, you're not sick, they believe that just a casual breathing, you can transmit the virus. I would know, is there scientific evidence for that? And the whole social distancing, where I know there's some theories, is there any hard scientific evidence that if 2 people stand 5 feet apart, the person's at great risk versus 6 feet or 2 feet? Is there any hard scientific evidence to back that up? And I'll just mention one last thing to give a background on this. I saw one report of a German scientist who went to a town, you may be familiar with the report, that supposedly had an outbreak of coronavirus. And then he started sampling. He started sampling doorknobs, tables, cars, everything. He couldn't find any coronavirus. He then started looking in the hair of house pets, because if there's coronavirus, it would have to be in the hairs of the dogs and cats. No coronavirus. And one question I keep asking, I've not got any answer to, cities, especially big cities, New York, they have devices for sampling the air. I've seen them, especially during New Year's Eve. They have them out there in case of biological warfare or anything. Where are the air sample studies showing how saturated the air is of coronavirus? I haven't seen any. Maybe you guys know what some. So the basic question is, how easily is this transmitted, and where is there hard science supporting the 6 foot distancing and the other measures that will be taken? I think Dr. Rasnick, it's probably your turn.
Okay. You'd make a good scientist. I tell you why, because the essence of being a good scientist is having good questions, not good answers, good questions. Far more important than a whole handful of good answers.
I really feel honored by that question, by that response. Thank you very much.
Anyway, it's total nonsense, this social distancing stuff. It's like wearing the mask. It's just to see how much you can get people to go along, control people's behavior. I had a little question for Jack, though, real quick. The last person asked the question brought it to mind. Coronaviruses are RNA viruses, which are very unstable. They mutate all the time. And now I forgot my question.
You can come back to it. It's okay.
I've been wanting to ask it for 5 minutes and I forgot.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's why it's good to write to everybody, write things down, because when the question pops in your head. But so basically you're saying this whole social distancing, there's no air samples saying you don't agree, that there's no proof, scientific proof to support this social distancing.
I don't know if there is or not, but I think I would have heard about it. You know, I've been a scientist now for over 40 years. I think I would have heard about it at some point in my life, and I certainly have heard a lot about a lot of things. I think it's utter nonsense.
Okay, Dr. Weiler?
Okay, so just yesterday, and I haven't read the study, but you can find, I think there's a study that they took somebody that had coronavirus and they had them in a cough box, it's called. So they put their head in a hole in a box, and then they sample the floor where the virus would sample after they actually have a coughing fit. I don't know the outcome of that, but I think that the story was something like 6 or 8 feet that they could sample it that far, and that's not surprising, because when you cough or you sneeze, it can go pretty far. I can tell you that there is no study that shows social distancing works or doesn't work, but there's very simple ways to look at this at the epidemiologic level, look at countries that are doing social distancing and look at them that are not, but there's so many other factors. But I will tell you that China reported, because they're a control society and they have everybody on videotape and they know where everyone is at all times, it's really kind of scary. Not kind of scary, it's absolutely terrifying. There was a person that came down with coronavirus after being the only person on a bus. They got on the bus, they left, and it was and then they developed coronavirus, the COVID-19. They looked at the videotape of the bus in China, and I think it was 4 hours earlier that they found that the person that must have infected them was on the bus 4 hours earlier. If you're in a closed air circulation system, my understanding is that you can infect people in the same building. And that's because this thing allegedly has aerosolized. I think we need time to be able to do the studies that you're talking about, and you're ahead of the curve.
Okay. I remember my question.
Oh, good.
I remember my question. Jack, they're planning to make these RNA vaccines. I thought, how do they work? I thought the vaccines had to be protein.
Okay, so the way that an mRNA vaccine works is that you actually put the RNA into the cell itself, and it's exposed, it's picked up by the cell, and then once it's in the cell, it's handled like any other RNA. It goes to the side of the ribosome.
It's turned into protein.
Our cells make it into protein at the right side of the ribosome.
Oh,
it's kind of clever.
This is very disturbing. Because
Yeah, it's kind of.
they're infecting your cell with viral RNA.
That's right. And I asked Teresa
like
Deisher.
the government would do.
I said, what's the probability that this RNA that's coming in this way is going to then reverse transcribe into our genome, right? And she said, well, that should be about the same as the baseline probability if, of an infection. It's no different than the virus. The difference between the mRNA vaccine and the virus is that the virus is capable of replicating the entire virus. The mRNA vaccine only puts in the spike protein, as I understand, but they skipped over animal studies, so we don't know whether it's going to cause pathogenic priming like SARS vaccines did. Personally, I think all this nonsense talk about vaccines being the answer is a monumental waste of time. It's a monumental waste of money. Imagine what would happen if we took that money and we shipped out vials of selenium, vitamin C, vitamin D, exercise, instructions for exercise, vitamin A, and so on. And, it's a colossal waste of money. And what this is for the people, I'm convinced that the people that are the vaccinologists in our country, they have complete blinders on. Everything can be solved with a vaccine, according to them. Every last societal problem. They have seen none of the collateral damage from the lockdown. They see all benefit. This is going to force a vaccine. People are going to be pissed off and they're going to want a vaccine to get back to work.
Jack, I am so glad I remembered that question because that was a very important answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Quick thing before we go back to the phones. That's why you're talking about the coughing. I've thought about that a lot. And one, most people who cough don't have coronavirus. Believe it or not, I mean, most people don't realize that because if you cough, you think, oh, you got corona. The reality is, as we all know, people have been coughing ever since there've been people. And so every time this person coughs, they have coronavirus. I'm saying that to say that if I check my memory banks, I'm hard pressed to remember the last time I actually saw somebody in public coughing and sneezing constantly. Now, we don't know if that person actually have anything, but I just want to make the point that it seems very rare that the average person in America is in close proximity to somebody who's coughing and sneezing a lot. If I'm thinking back years, I can't even remember the last time. And I think part of that's because when somebody's that sick that they're coughing and sneezing a lot, they're probably very weak and they're going to want to stay home anyway or be in a hospital. So, I mean, should coughing, should we automatically assume that that person has coronavirus? And how much should we worry about it, since most people, I live in New York, so I'm out in front of thousands of people all the time. How often do the average person see someone or make contact with somebody who's coughing and sneezing constantly?
Okay, so if you're in a crowded area, I would invert the question into what's the probability that you're going to be exposed to coronavirus if you're in your town doing shopping and so on and so on. And that all depends on the prevalence of the infection. And the fight to keep the infection way down, the rate of infection way down, and the prevalence and incidence of coronavirus down reduces your risk for sure. There are people I know that if someone's coughing and sneezing, they're going to run as fast as they can to get within that six foot parameter to get that natural immunity that they want the coronavirus. But seriously, if we take a look at the eventual outlay here, something has to give. Something big has to give. There has to be some big aha moment, some realization that makes it okay to reopen society and still have this minimal risk to those people at risk, because the vaccine's probably not going to work. It's probably going to be found to be unsafe. Everyone should fight against phase 2 studies and vaccines unless there's the animal studies first. You should contact your legislators and say, no phase 2 studies for coronavirus vaccines without the animal studies first. But what I think that epiphany is going to be is, wait a minute, why are we going through medical doctors to have this testing in the first place? Just let people know their status and let them act as rational beings, because every person that decides what they're going to do with their time, maybe if I'm tested and I'm naive, my immune system's naive, and I'm healthy, and I've been isolated, and I want to get out of my house, and I'm not going to infect any, and I'm willing to be sick for 2 weeks, I might run towards that person that's coughing. right? If I'm at risk or I'm with somebody that's at risk, I might go, wait a minute, I really don't want to be around people that are coughing. This is an individual decision in the end. And I think that's what the epiphany is going to be. The only way that America can recover from this is to get back to normal, where we're taking responsibility for our own actions. And that's rugged American individualism.
I'm sorry, I just want to
I
jump
couldn't
in
agree.
with one thing before
I was doing the same
um,
thing, Don.
I know, Brian, you and I are always on the same page. Before Kelly asks her question, she's been waiting so patiently, as has Sandy. Why is this different than anything else? Like, we don't have a constitutional right to not catch somebody else's bacteria or virus. I mean, there are millions of those floating around the universe every second of every single day. Why now? And what does that look like for us moving forward, not only with all the viruses and bacteria that we're already aware of and we already have vaccines for, and the billions of others, but anything else that we discover later on? I mean, is this just going to be the precedent for now on, social distancing, and we're going to shut down the economy? And I mean, I'm sure people can pick up what I'm dropping, but I mean, this just seems so blown out of proportion. We're not entitled to not being sick in life.
I think the key there is proportion. They've shut down schools if there's a whooping cough outbreak. They shut down schools if there's a mumps outbreak. So it's a proportion. It's the degree to which people are allowing this to happen. In some states, it's happening more than others. I think it's a continuation of the same, and I'm really happy that it's gotten, for many reasons. For many reasons, I'm very upset and angry and depressed. For other reasons, I'm very happy, because it is showing so many people in America how ludicrous and out of their minds the people who control our public health management are. This is we're off the rails, absolutely off the rails. And the same people that were saying, you stupid anti-vaxxers, you're going to give my kid measles and wait till, I hope your kid gets measles and die. Those same people are now saying, I'm out of a job. What if I'm going to survive this virus? Why do I care about somebody else? So this is such a benefit to vaccine risk awareness. I think it hasn't had a full manifestation yet, but exponentially people are waking up to all the things that we've been talking about for years. And it's no different. I think it's all the same.
Dr. Rasnick, because you haven't had a chance to say something a little bit.
No, Jack's doing a great job here. Not that he did a fine job on that.
Okay, I guess we go to the next question.
Okay, that's going to be Sandy. I'm going to unmute you and lower your hand. Sandy, can you speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So, Dr. Weiler, you mentioned this test by Vibrant America. Is that actually on the market? And if so, where does one acquire that?
Well, so it's only a clinical test, which means you have to go to a physician. It is available. It's apparently $149. I'm learning with other people the total cost right now. That test is not private yet. I'm in discussions with the company about getting them to get behind private testing to make it available. The workaround would be to go to a small clinic and ask them if they'll test you anonymously. And if you sign a paper saying you're not going to hold them liable for and all this other stuff. But yeah, it's out there, but it's pricey. And the home test hopefully will be much, much less.
And do you anticipate that a home test will come to market in the near future?
Yeah, they're working on a home test. They do not, as far as I know, I can't speak for the company, I'm not a representative of them, but as far as last I knew, they did not have a definitive plan to try to petition the FDA to go to your local drugstore and pick it up privately.
Now, there's been talk about 5G and its implications for the immune system and so on. And I know that the people in the industry has been taking advantage of this COVID opportunity to install antennas in lots of places. New Jersey seems to be really covered with them. Do you have any comments on what the potential for 5G could be for recovery even from COVID-19 and similar infections?
I mean, I don't understand the question. How do you recover from 5G with 5G?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. What might the implications be for 5G on infection recovery? So how might that affect the way the immune systems of people react to these new infections? And now we've got the COVID-19. So
Can I comment just before? I'm not sure if we want to go down the path of 5G right now, because that's a whole nother area and it's pretty involved. I think we probably want to stick to the issue of testing, lockdown, those type of things right now, because I'm a little bit familiar with some of the arguments on 5G, and I don't think we really want to go there.
But Curtis, we're definitely going to have other programs about 5G. As you know, you were on just, I think, a week ago or so with us about 5G. We're going to do a lot more program about 5G. So Sandy, you'll definitely be invited back to ask any questions you'd like about that.
And we have 2 recorded calls that we already had doctors addressing that, and lawyers as well. So
great. Okay, I would like just one more question, and that will be it.
Sandy, I mean, I think in fact, I think we're going to have to limit to one because we got a few more people.
Okay, fine.
And it's 6:42. How many more questions do you think we should take, Brian?
We have Kelly Davis, who's been waiting a very, very long time. So Kelly, if you could please ask your question now.
Hello, I don't hear anything.
Okay. Hi. I just wanted to piggyback on the transmission question. I feel like the media uses the words droplet and airborne synonymously, and I know from working in the hospital, we have 2 very different protocols for people who are on droplet precautions versus airborne precautions. And I understand the idea of it being aerosolized in an environment where the air is circulated. So I was just curious as to what your thoughts were on the definitive transmission rate versus airborne.
So you're talking about the transmission rate would translates ultimately into R naught, and R naught is about 2.3. There's variation with culture. There's variation with programs. A lot of the discussion that we have right now, just to start broadly, and then I'll drill down. When we say, look, the hospitals are empty. Well, the hospitals are empty because they furloughed a lot of people, and so that a lot of people didn't get sick in the hospitals that work for the hospital at the same time, so that they're available if there was, a surge. And we're all social distancing, and so that definitely contributed to, lower use of hospitals at this time. I don't have a lot of data on it, other than we know that people can transmit this through non-intimate contact. So we'll start with that, and that's a problem. Ebola is hard to get. You basically have to share a fork, a spoon, something, kiss a person. It's very difficult to get because it's not aerosolized. It's very if a person sneezes in your face and they have Ebola, or you get their blood in your eye or something, that's intimate contact. But with this is worse. This is on I think it's on average about as transmissible, I would say, from what I've seen, is about the measles. So if you can get the measles by, semi-close contact, it might be a little bit more transmissible than the measles, I think. But we've all had common colds all of our life, right? So if somebody comes to your house and they came to a party and you got sick because you got the common cold, that's about how transmissible it was. They shared space in the same air with them. You don't have to, you hug somebody, you shake their hand, and then you put your hands in your eyes, nose, and mouth, that kind of thing. So it's about the same as a common cold, I would think, in terms of person to person.
Dr. Rasnick, do you want to respond to that, or?
No question. I mean, because I'm not even sure the virus exists yet, So, but it's a cold virus. A coronavirus is a cold virus. So I accept that there's colds transmitted by a coronavirus. So if this is a new coronavirus, it should be about as transmissible as any coronavirus, it would seem to me.
I do have a comment on that regarding swine flu back in the 1970s. I remember that very well because I was in high school at the time. In fact, I was in Rochester, Minnesota, the home of the Mayo Clinic. So I was surrounded by lots of smart people and doctors. And nonetheless, when they made the announcement about swine flu, I lined up in the school gym like everybody else, and then we got our swine flu shot. And they were supposed to have a second round, but that never happened. I never understood why. Well, many years later, when I started researching the swine flu, I discovered that it was a fiasco. If you go on YouTube and look up swine flu and look at the commercials were telling people that the swine flu was very, very contagious. They were showing examples of people holding hands or shaking hands, and that they say they implied it can be transmitted that way. That people hugging each other, swine flu could be transmitted that way. In fact, even when I watched it recently, it still scared me because those commercials were so well done. It had such a strong emotional appeal. But now, having researched it, I don't know how many people know, but how many actual Americans or people in the world actually had swine flu back then? I'm sure most of you don't know. It was 2, and they were on a military base. That was it. Nonetheless, they inoculated over 40 million people, and they got billions of dollars in lawsuits filed against them. So given all of that, myself, I'm naturally concerned when it's implied that this coronavirus, with Dr. Rasnick, with his 40 years of experience, is not convinced yet has been proven to be the culprit. When I hear that it's as transmissible as measles, at the same time listening to Dr. Rasnick, I have to wonder, are we in another situation back in the 70s where people being scared out of their wits, thinking about you touch a doorknob, you're going to get coronavirus, you touch an elevator button or even money. I'm really concerned if the fear factor is way in excess of what can actually be proven right now.
You are absolutely right. This is only about fear. This is the whole point of this whole thing that we're experiencing. It's not really about a plague itself or viral pandemic. It's a plague of fear of a viral pandemic. That's what we're going to talk about the next hour, I guess.
Well, we're not going to have.
No, I
I
think we
think
have that much time.
second program has been canceled, right, Curtis?
What? Right. The other show that we were going to do, Dr. Rasnick and Lyons, the host of that show had an emergency, so the other show is canceled. We're going on 7 o'clock. So Brian, Dawn, please guide me.
Yeah.
How much longer you like to go?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go too much longer than 7, but that's a little more than I had bargained for. But this has been excellent. I really appreciate all of you, everyone participating, the doctors especially, and Curtis, but everyone who joined today. But yeah, let's have a couple more quick questions, and then we'll try to wrap it up so that everybody can go have dinner. Now, where are you, by the way, Dr. Rasnick? Are you still in Georgia?
I'm in, well, I left California. I've lived in California a long time. We moved to Greensboro, North Carolina 2 years ago. We love it here.
Okay.
If you have to be in a place with the coronavirus pandemic, this is the place to be. Trees everywhere, animals all over the place.
Well, I echo that. My father-in-law moved to, he's out in the mountains, in the Smoky Mountains in Western North Carolina. He's right close to the Tennessee border, but he's got a house in the mountains, and it is absolutely gorgeous. I've been there, and I hope to go back again soon. I was going to go this summer. I don't know with all of this, but I do want to just read a couple of the questions very quickly. Somebody said, I think it was Amy Gordon, is there any possibility that getting flu shots is a huge precipitating factor in coronavirus cases taking a turn for the worse? Most people who are hospitalized are likely going to get a flu shot as a matter of protocol, right?
Yeah, so I would say the stupidest thing you can do to a human being that's trying to fight off any infection is to inject them with thimerosal. And since we know that 80% of the flu vaccines that are used routinely in the United States contain thimerosal, Amy's point is well put. Thimerosal inhibits a protein called ERAP1. And the ERAP1 is responsible for, in the cell, actually folding proteins that appear on the cell surface that our immune system uses. And so it's totally reasonable to expect that mechanism by which people become more sick in any time they go to the doctors, especially if they're unconscious and they have the standing order to vaccinate you against flu, is to get the flu shot. There's a couple of studies that we know about. I think the community is pretty well aware now about the Ben Collings study that showed that if you get the flu shot, that you're more likely to have a non-influenza respiratory virus infection. He's out of Hong Kong. That was a few years ago. And then a more recent one from the VA department, a study of a veteran study that showed, but they attributed it to viral interference, which was something new to me. Is I suppose that they're trying to say something like linked epitope suppression, but it's an ad hoc hypothesis. I believe that it's probably more likely that we're causing immune impairment by the flu virus. And in fact, Dr. Rasnick, I don't know if you know this or not, but I looked at the incidence of publications in PubMed on diseases of unknown origin on a hunch that there might have been something related to the onset of mass vaccination in '76 due to the swine flu that Curtis was just talking about. And from the 1950s, 60s, all the way until 1976, it's flat. And then from '76, it's gone up linearly, these odd diseases of unknown origin, which of course is a boon for the medical community. And so, yeah, the flu shot's making people sick. The flu shot's making the population sick. I've written very strongly worded, evidence-based arguments about if you're an ethical physician, you'll read this, you'll understand this, and you've got to make your decisions on what's best for your patient, considering all of the effects of the vaccine, not just your supposed effect of 0% chance of not getting the flu, 0% effective. The flu vaccine is not effective either, but that's kind of off point.
Are you still able to get grant funding?
Oh, heck no. I'm free and independent. So I look at Amy's laughing. No, I would never go back to grant writing. Are you kidding me? Ever. I'm not taking a dime of government money. I'll never take a dime of government money or Gates Foundation money. I won't take any money from anybody but freedom-loving Americans, North Americans, South Americans, Central Americans. If it's green, I can spend it on science. I'll use it.
We got to go out for a beer one of these days.
A couple, yeah. Let's do that.
A couple, yeah.
No, the community has actually been very good to IPAC and very interested in expanding eventually to incorporate more research. We're funding. I want to fund new research by people like Chris Shaw. I've tried to get a couple of initiatives there. We tried just before this happened. We launched an autoimmune research fund at IPAC, and that's kind of put on hold because coronavirus. Trying to make sense of it, it's taken all my time. But we want to do aluminum injections in mice and see what happens. That hasn't been done, believe it or not, where you increase the dose of aluminum. And we have peer-reviewed studies. Another study that we're just finishing touches on is the effect once the outbreak is done, or once we go back to normal and we let people out back into society, all the kids are going to start vaccinating all again, right? The parents are going to bring their kids to well-child visits after a hiatus. So the study that we're about to publish, about to submit for peer review, actually looks at the effects of going back on the CDC schedule, using the CDC's catch-up schedule on aluminum accumulation with all the aluminum containing vaccines they're about to get. So yeah, we're timely and we're active, and we're quite the thorn in the side of people who don't want to base reality on reality.
And that's going to be, I think, it's something that could be a very important turning point in our movement when all these parents do go back and get their kids vaccinated after skipping these well visits for 6 or 12 months. And then seeing what happens. I think it may wake a lot of people up. And unfortunately, I say unfortunately, as a parent of a vaccine-injured child myself, injured by the flu shot, actually, very, very severely. And it's something that I think, unfortunately, it takes oftentimes a tragedy to happen before people do become aware. But I do want to just ask one more question, and then we will wrap up, have any concluding remarks, and we'll be done here because you've been more than gracious with your time tonight. I have, let's see, in the chat, I'm looking at the chat. You guys can all see it, but I'm trying to just pick one that we haven't covered yet.
I see
Elaine,
Alex Meyer. I think she's up next. Is Alex Meyer? I think I saw her up.
do we have a hand
Yeah,
up?
I have a burning question, and I've been on the road, but I just got home.
All right, so go ahead and ask
Hey.
it.
You're not
Go
connected
ahead,
to
Alex.
audio.
Alex,
Alex?
can you hear us?
I just got off my phone. I just got home and was dying to get on the Zoom call. I don't know if this has been answered because I had to go away for an hour, but I have a burning question and I really want this answered. And I think that Jack and Dr. Muller Dr. Rasnick, I'm sorry, could both be correct. And the question is, what if you guys are both right? What if, Jack, you say the virus is made in a lab, and
No, I don't
published-
say that. I say it escaped.
Okay.
I say it escaped.
Sorry,
from the
sorry.
lab.
Actually, sorry, I'm wording it incorrectly. What if the published genome doesn't have anything to do with what's circulating, and somebody created a model of that in a lab and put it in sputum and found a certain result? But what if that genome that's released and can be created in a lab just from that genome artificially is designed to be pathogenic, but it doesn't reflect what's actually circulating? Then Jack, you'd be technically right. And so what I want to see is the circulating virus isolated from those who've tested positive with symptoms and from those who test positive without symptoms, and see if that can be cultured and replicated and if it causes the COVID symptoms at all. And I also want the circulating virus isolated and sequenced from many, many patients to see if that matches the Chinese sequence that was released on January 11th, because I'm not convinced that that's anything more than a piece of propaganda at this point.
Okay, so North American scientists in Washington State did exactly that. They isolated the genomic material for the virus and they sequenced it, and it matches the original sequence out of China.
Oh, good.
So that's been done, and it's been done now thousands of times where patients with the virus has been sequenced. And if you have a viral infection, and if you get coronavirus, I would suggest, if anybody on the call ever gets it, that you individually should say, I would like to get my sequence done. They'll say, you can't do it for clinical testing, but you can do it for research. Fine, we'll do it for research. We'll pay for it. Okay, IPAC will pay to get your sequence so that our community has somebody like yourself, Alex. I hope you don't get coronavirus, but if you get infected, it'd be wonderful to have that sequence so that we have a bona fide person with merit in our, recognized in our community that says, guess what? This is what happened to me, firsthand experience, and all of this. The question that keeps coming up, no matter how many times I answer it, and I say this with a lot of love and respect for people that like to ask questions, is how do we know the virus exists and it's never been purified? There's been studies that have, this goes back to the very first question that I didn't fully answer. There's been studies that have actually determined the three-dimensional structure of the spike protein by isolating the virus first, isolating the viral protein, letting it fold, and then, okay, so when you do that, you have at some point in time isolated the virus. You just haven't done it for the purposes of proving that it exists. You've done it for science. So if there's a three-dimensional X-ray crystallographic study of the spike protein, and there is, then at some point we've had control of this virus.
Yeah, I don't dispute that X-ray. I mean, that crystal structure or MRI, whichever way they did it, was a three-dimensional structure of that spike protein. It's almost identical to the other spike proteins of other coronaviruses. So I don't dispute that that is a spike protein of a coronavirus. Is it the spike protein of the coronavirus that we're all talking about?
Yeah, so just the same way that human hands and chimpanzee hands are very, very similar, right? I did a deep dive into the structural motif of SARS coronavirus and SARS-CoV-2. And there's a unique structural motif signature that actually tells me that this wasn't made in the lab. It tells me that the Chinese had a virus that looked a lot like this in 2005, but they didn't know it. They sequenced it. They got the sample. They sequenced it. They published the sequence, and they called it SARS. David Rasnick, I'm flipping names here. Ralph Barrick actually downloaded the sequence. Didn't know it was SARS. SARS-CoV-2. They thought it was SARS. So they were handling, the information about the virus, and they didn't know they had the ancestor of this virus. And this was 2005, 2008. I'm sorry, I got my dates all mixed up there. But it's a natural virus that exists in bats. This I'm convinced of. Alex, the point is, I think that the woman who went missing in China, her last name was Hong. She's a master's degree scientist, probably died of this. And the CCP's covered it up. They say she's fine, but nobody knows where to find her. There's a great coverage on this and I think we have patient 0 even. The question is, will the CCP ever admit this? And it's going to take a massive revolution within the scientific community, or some intense pressure from international to say yes, and they'll say those people were fired. The problem is, it's the militant, the far right extremists in China that have control of the military science. So they went in and they destroyed the lab. They destroyed samples. They destroyed information. I have every reason to believe that they actually put a gun to the head of somebody and forced them to redo a phylogenetic analysis that assumed that the Nanjing command sequence itself was the outgroup to all beta coronaviruses. When you do that, then it makes it look like it doesn't come from China.
Okay. Can I interject for a second? Dr. Rasnick, I'd like to try to see if I can combine both of what you're saying. Would you begin to be satisfied that a new virus, a new strain of coronavirus, was responsible if someone successfully obtained a purified sample and then followed all of the steps outlined in Koch's postulates? If that was done, would you begin to be satisfied?
I would probably be satisfied, yeah.
Okay.
But I would accept an animal model. Where's the animal model right now? We've got over 20,000 publications since January on this coronavirus stuff. And I haven't looked at all 21,000, but I have not heard anything about an animal model. That would be a really big step to take this new coronavirus. I mean, look what they say. It came from bats or something like that. It comes from other mammals. There should be an animal model on this thing to satisfy people like me that want to see data.
Yeah, Dr. Weiler, I know you're going to respond. Just if you can include in your response, okay, if Dr. Rasnick, with his 40 years of experience, to say he would be satisfied if you got all these patients that you say have coronavirus, take blood samples, sputum samples, whatever you want, go ahead and get your purification and go through all the steps of Koch's postulates, and that way you both be on the same page. I mean, why not just go ahead and do that?
I am absolutely supportive of that kind of science. My point would be, let's use the animal model to test and screen drugs so that we can treat people that want the treatment. The Koch's postulates are a good place to start. It's just that science has moved on from basic science. We tend not to think in basic terms anymore. We think in terms of applied terms, and we think in like, what's the utility for this, for improving things in the clinic? And we tend to think in terms of profitability. And that last part is totally bastardized medicine for medical science for me. So what I would like to see is the exact same animal study where you take a virus from a human, you put it in the lab, you infect the lab, mouse, rat, ferret, whatever, which we've done many times with SARS. And then you screen, you create hundreds of these mice in a BSL-4 that's not in Wuhan, okay? You can't do this in Wuhan. Do it in a very safe way, and you screen drug after drug after drug after drug after drug, and you try to infect it. When you find the compounds that block and don't have problems in terms of they've made a genetically modified mouse that apparently has the ACE2 receptor of humans. So they're moving towards animal studies. That's coming for sure.
Well, you see, okay, I still don't understand. I know you're saying they're moving away from that, but that's the foundation, Koch's postulates. So is there any reason, financially or whatever, stopping them from just doing it? Do the purification, do the growing of the stuff, do the reproduction inside is there anything stopping science from just doing this? Because
the only thing stopping it is that it's a given, and it's not an assumption. It's a given, which means it's background knowledge. See, Popper taught us. I'm a Popperian. Popper taught us that you base your hypothesis on background knowledge, based on years of doing science first, and then you're going to extend your background knowledge by stating a hypothesis. And then you create a test for that hypothesis. It's a critical test that might falsify the hypothesis. And then in falsifying the hypothesis, trying to falsify the hypothesis, you either refute it or you don't. And if you refute it, then you have falsified the hypothesis, and then you have to update your background knowledge. If you fail to falsify your hypothesis, then okay, listen, this is probably reality. What has to fall in the lap of scientists working on coronavirus is a hypothesis that they consider worth testing. And if I wrote a proposal right now to the NIH and I said I want to test Koch's postulates, it would be triage. They would say this is trivial. This is beside the point, because our background knowledge includes that it's a relative of SARS. We know where it comes from in terms of the bat. It can be found in bat guano, and the virus exists. So why in the world would you ever test it? Something with, and we can call them assumptions or we can call it background knowledge. And if it boils down to that, then the only way science is ever going to do Koch's postulates is if it's independently funded, or if it's and you need a BSL-4 lab to handle this virus. So you're going to have to get somebody willing to do it, or they happen to create a scenario by accident that they have to update their background knowledge.
Dr. Dr. Rasnick,
Yeah.
One second, Dr. Rasnick, could you respond to that? Can you think of any reason why they are not doing this? Dr. Weiler basically say, well, it's so basic, and so we got other stuff more advanced. You get 40 years, and so we can't ignore that. And you're saying, my basic question, I guess, is could it partly be that it's such a high standard they can't do it, or they can't do it readily, or what? What?
They don't want to. The whole point of this thing. This is why I was hoping we have the next talk here at 7. The whole point of this thing is not about science. It's political. It's about fear of a virus to reorder the world. We're already seeing it. We are living with it. It's doing exactly what the designers want it to do. Put the world in lockdown so it will go broke. Everybody will have to borrow trillions and trillions of dollars. They have to pay it back. We'll all be in debt. And then they just rebuild the world again like they did right after World War II. That's what this is all about. It's not about science at all.
I think we need to take that seriously because he's 40 years of experience, I think, counts. Alex, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I want to ask a really straightforward follow-up question because, Jack, that was a beautiful response answering part of my question. So the virus has been isolated from people who are sick, and it's been sequenced, and those sequences match the sequence that was released by the Chinese on January 11th, right? Okay, so then we go to the animal model, because I don't think you can do this ethically in humans, but you take what's been isolated and you infect a mouse and get them to produce similar symptoms that the humans are having who are infected, and then you see if that mouse can infect other mice also. Has that been done? When's that going to be done?
That's coming.
I think we should clarify a little bit. When you say isolation, that's not the same thing as purification. So you could take a saliva sample and say that's been and put it in a culture and claim that's you're doing isolation. Purification means nothing but the virus and only the virus.
Curtis, you're right. I meant purification. I definitely used the wrong word.
Okay, so in terms of the question, that protocol is underway right now. So they've actually tried to humanize some mice by putting in ACE2 receptor genes so that the infectivity and the pathophysiology would be similar. They also have to change the virus a little bit to make it able to replicate in mice like they did with SARS. But that now is trivial. And I don't mean that it's not important. I mean, it's easy to do. So I would be shocked if we don't start seeing in the next month or so animal studies. The first study will say we've successfully, infected a mouse with SARS-CoV-2. And if you go to Jackson Laboratories has mice. They usually are the place where you go to get mouse models. You could probably order a SARS-CoV-2 susceptible mouse in a couple of months. So when you start seeing those publications, the question is, will they ever then go, okay, listen, we want to see if this mouse can infect that mouse? It depends on the experiments that are done. If they're really interested in the transmissibility questions, or are they just going to go pharmaceutical? they're just going to go pharmaceutical. And I think that they should focus on what's going to reduce, loss of human life and bring out an end to the pandemic as soon as possible. That would be my preference. Even as deeply as into this woke place that we are, I would prefer that they use the science that they do is to actually end the pandemic, not prolong it.
And I don't think there is a pandemic. I don't think there is a pandemic. I think it's non-existent.
So here's my question, coming from two different points of view, that it is a real virus, that it's not, that it's a pandemic, that it's not. How do we end the lockdown, right? How do we get in-home private testing for people that want it and ensure that that will not be made mandatory for children to go to school, for people to go back to work, for people to go to birthday parties and go see grandma and grandpa and go visit the new baby? This has changed society and we cannot accept this as our new normal. So what can we collectively do to ensure that that is not our future?
You put your finger on it. That's what we should be talking about. And I tell you, we don't have much time. Things are ramping up really fast. Fortunately, there's more and more rebellions, I guess you'd call it, in the States. Certainly down here in the South, more people are rebelling a little bit. And up in Michigan and Minnesota, Virginia, Lord, I can't remember all the states, but now it's Georgia and these other places. And they're even starting to open up some of the places here in the South, South Carolina, Georgia, not here in North Carolina yet. We are going to have to, we are sovereign, not the president, not Congress. We are sovereign. We are going to have to take this in our own hands. We're going to have to stop wearing masks. We're going to have to stop doing the social distancing. We have got to show people who are the boss, That's what I think. And I don't think we have a whole lot of time to waste to make that decision.
I also want to throw in, and then I hope we can go to Christian because he has a burning question. She texted me. I was in a meeting just a few months ago, and I was raising concerns long before there was any coronavirus outbreak about states having too much power in emergency situations. And I think that's something now it's just the biggest story in the world. I think we need to look at changing the laws such that the criteria for which a state or governor can declare an emergency are much, much higher. They should not be able to have a handful of cases and declare emergency. I think that there needs to be public civilian input before any decisions like that are made. Right now, we have a governor here in New York who at the stroke of midnight put forth legislation that basically made him king or god of New York. And all laws throughout New York State are null and void, and he is the god of New York right now. That should not happen. That should not be in the spirit. That cannot be the spirit of our Constitution, our laws. Somebody can pass something at midnight with a handful of his friends. We should not have that allowed. One lesson from what's happening right now is the laws that are currently in place, it can enslave us. Just like that, a handful of powerful people use their influence on those who are in government at all of our rights. They can shut down our food, transportation, access to our doctors. The laws must be changed. The government, a handful of hand-picked politicians on the payroll of the drug companies should not have that much power. There needs to be civilian input before this type of action could ever be taken again. And whatever actions are taken has to be approved and monitored by a civilian body. That's my thoughts. Could we please get Christian to, if we can get to her, she's still up, because he wanted to ask a question about
just a minute. There's a question from Dawn.
Okay.
I'd like to address how do we go back to how do we open society?
Okay.
And you brought up some good points, which I'll also touch on. I am your science advisor. I am the public's science advisor. I don't advise the president. I don't advise Congress. Okay. So when you say there should be a civilian voice here, I want to say, at the beginning of an epidemic, put SARS-CoV-2 aside. Whether the virus, anything exists aside. During a real epidemic, the civilian response goes as follows. Well, it's only 2 cases, nothing to worry about. Well, it's only 4 cases, nothing to worry about. It's only 200 cases. It's only 4,000 cases. It's only 80,000 cases. Look at the size of America. It's only it's only 1 million cases and there's 300 million of us. It's impossible to educate the public fast enough in an epidemic situation about exponential processes, okay? To get a response where it goes, wait a minute, okay, if we're really thinking rationally about this, if something's doubling every 3 days, which it was doubling every 3 days for sure. This is before they started cooking the numbers. It was doubling every 3 days. What is a rational response? And I'm going to throw something out there because I know this is being recorded. Who are the protesters to decide my fate with this virus? Right? That's what we say. Who is the government to decide my immunity? Well, who are the protesters if they win? Let's say they go mob mentality, they take everything over and they say, we're going to spread coronavirus all over and everybody's going to get it. Who are they to decide that I should get coronavirus and Grace should have a 6.3% mortality risk? They're not authorized to do so by me. They're authorized to protest, but they're not authorized to have the final say. And so what I believe that we should do is what I believe that we should do is we should empower Americans to retain the rights that we have, which include making up our own minds about how we're going to handle our own risks. And good luck to the rest of people that I happen to run into if I make the wrong decision on that day, because guess what? Somebody got this virus from me. They used to prosecute people for having unprotected sex if they were HIV positive in California. They used to prosecute them. And now they just changed the laws. Okay, we're not going to prosecute anymore. So why am I culpable if I infect somebody? And who is to decide for me on my behalf? I want to decide and manage my own risks. I want to decide my own path to immunity, whether it's through infection or injection. And therefore, let's just defend the rights that we already have, which are HIPAA, privacy, the right to know your status if you want to without any other person on the planet ever knowing, and an infection if you want it, and injection if you want it. So anti-mandate for sure. And so stand up to Congress and say, if you do not get to phase 2, we need everybody on the call collectively, get a hold of Congress and say, no phase 2 studies on vaccines unless they do the animal studies. If you don't do animal studies and show that there's no pathogenic priming, you have no business going to phase 2. That's vaccine. There's over 70 vaccines that are being planned.
That's right. Okay,
and so I would say, let's hold on to the rights that we have and fight like the Dickens, where nobody's making up anybody else's mind, about their path to immunity.
Okay, Dr. Rasnick, could you respond to what I said, Dr. Weiler just said? Do you feel that what we're seeing right now is an overstep of power? And should we assume that all politicians are at the pillar of intellectualism and the rest of us are too dumb to have input on these type of laws and policies? What are your thoughts?
Well, that's crazy. That if a person accepts that, who builds this country? Who works and makes it run? Not the politicians, not the bosses, it's we the people. We are the sovereign people here. And it's almost too late. I mean, Jack was talking about the rights that we have. We don't have rights. We don't even have rights to shake people's hands. We don't have rights to go to church. Now our rights, if you're on YouTube or not YouTube, YouTube, you can't, you'll have your program taken off if you mention coronavirus and 5G. That woman that brought it up there, I was thinking, is this even going to go on the air? Because they had programs that were taken off of YouTube because 5G was mentioned in the same thing that was talking about coronavirus. We don't even have free speech anymore. So we do not have these rights that Jack is talking about. They are evaporating on a daily basis. The only thing we have, the people that are protesting aren't protesting against the virus. They're protesting about being out of work, not being able to feed their families. That's what they're protesting about. People are going to die in the millions from starvation, that far more people than they're going to be dying of this bogus virus. Even if it really exists, it's peanuts.
Even the
compared-
New York Times today admitted that 256 million people are facing hunger and starvation. Even the New York Times said that, so the number is probably a lot higher.
Yeah, I mean, you mean I underestimated. Okay.
Any more questions, or are we ready to sort of wind down?
I'm ready, man. It's been
Yeah, it's been a long time.
2.5 hours.
Okay, well, I guess I'll initiate. If anybody wants to, Dr. Weiler or Dr. Rasnick will make any closing comments. I just want to say first, you both gave brilliant, detailed presentations and a tremendous amount of food for thought for people to do additional research. I want to thank you, because this, I will say, this was an historic event. It's rare to get individuals like yourself of your caliber to debate a topic like this. And so this is a historic event. And since it's videotape, it's going to get out there. A lot more people are going to have food for thought and make it their own minds and do their own research. So I thank you. And if you could take each of you a minute or so to any closing thoughts, feel free.
Yeah, I just want to thank you guys. You're doing your part. I'm doing my part, but trying to share my experience and what I understand. You guys are doing your part, asking the questions and putting it out there in the world. We've all got a part to do. And I want to thank Jack. He and I disagree strongly on some things, but we agree a lot more than we disagree. At least I think so. And I just wanted to congratulate all of you, and I'll do it again if you ask me.
Thank you.
Right
And
on.
I will ask you.
So
You took the words out of my mouth.
I want to, thank the organizers and the moderator. I want to say, I know each of you, almost all of you individually. There's a lot I want to say to all of you because I haven't seen you in so long, right? But in reality, what I want to say is for this group, please look at the dates on my blog articles at jameslyonsweiler.com. I've been consistently ahead of the curve and consistently correct in saying what was going to happen, how it was going to roll out, and what the government was going to do, what the people were going to do, what the virus was going to do, how this was going to proceed. And I have one in there particular, how this pandemic will end. That's a daunting title for anyone to write. That's an audacious title. How this pandemic will end. Go look at the dates. All right, I'm consistently a month ahead, and it has been nothing but pushing molasses uphill, and can try to convince people that when the government says we want to mandate that you test, and we will test each and every one of you, it's the precursor to we want to give you an immunity card and take your rights away, which is the precursor to we're going to mandate this vaccine, which is a precursor to we're going to mandate all vaccines. So when I say we want private testing, I'm a month ahead of everything. And that's where we're all going to be fighting for private testing and the right to say no to testing. Because if we fight for no testing, that's not going to happen. There are some people that I want to be tested. Right? It's impossible to imagine a future where all of a sudden we've convinced 90% of the public that knowing your status is not going to help you decide whether you're going to go to this or go to that event. And so please look at my blog articles. They are a blueprint. When I haven't been wrong, I wrote an article where I said this looks like it was created in a lab, and I'm absolutely wrong on that point, I think. But there are blueprint for what was about to happen, and then look at what happened 2 weeks later. And what I'm saying right now is this particular week is the week that we either make this fight. David's exactly right. We have no time left. We either really seriously get together and make this fight for private testing, or it will be mandatory testing. Nobody's leading a charge for no testing. So, right? I will lead a charge for no testing if that's the consensus, and everybody in the movement says, but I believe we will lose. So we will lose that fight badly. And whoever wins, this is the decisive battle, is the battle for independent testing, free and independent testing. Maintain your rights. Remind them that we have the rights that they think that they
Dr.
took.
Weiler, we're going to have to wrap up. I apologize. I got to.
Well, no, he's. You know what? I want to say, Curtis, right before you conclude, is that I hear what you're saying, Jack, and I think what it is that it's a matter of being a realist, right? It's like my friend on here, Dawn, always says when I give her a hard time and say she's being a pessimist. she always replies invariably that I'm not a pessimist, I'm a realist. And I think that's exactly what you're saying here is it's not realistic to think that we're not going to get any testing whatsoever. Because if it's not private, it's coming from where? The government, right? And it's going to be mandated. Those are your only two options. There is no option where there's no test available anywhere and tests are banned.
But under my plan, you have the right to say no.
Right. So those are the only two options. So choose one now.
I'm not sure if I agree. I do think there's a third option, and people can say no to mandatory testing. I think
that is my option. That is my option. My option includes no mandatory testing.
Well, there's voluntary testing has always existed. I mean,
it's not voluntary. It's private. There's a difference. Voluntary means that you're submitting to a program. So, Curtis, next time you think about this, think about the last time you thought you had a fever and you took a temperature. Your own temperature. You didn't report it to anybody. You weren't involved in a program. You didn't do it voluntarily. You just tested yourself.
Well, there are people who argue, and I'm not personally inclined. You guys are the experts. I'm not personally inclined to do any of the coronavirus tests because I mean, I can't ignore Dr. Rasnick's points. I mean, he's been doing this for 40 years. He's not satisfied. And if he's not satisfied, I'm not going to be satisfied either. So I don't want to hear, I'm not personally inclined to hear anything about any testing until they've done the purification, they follow all of cautious steps, and most importantly, if people like Dr. Rasnick say, okay, they've proven it, I'm satisfied.
I'll send you both the tech sheets for the test that I'm advocating for.
Yeah, understood. But people can decide what. But I don't want people leaving this thinking we are submissive and have to be submissive to the powers that be. We're 350-something million people. We are the power. Our biggest challenge is helping more people to understand the complexities of these issues. So I don't want people thinking we only have two choices: we private testing at home, or are they going to force us? No, we are the power. Technically, the politicians work for us. And I think we need to keep that in mind. People make their own decisions, but I think we got to wrap up. And I know Christian had a burning question. I don't see her up there. I don't know if she could ask it, but other than that, we'll be coming back. And I'd like to thank all of you for attending. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. This was great, and we'll see you all again soon. We really appreciate your participation and everybody who watched as well. This was awesome, and we'll be in touch.
Right. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you so much, Jack. Thank you, Curtis, for moderating. And Dr. Rasnick, I can't wait to speak with you again as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great.
Talk to you all soon.
Okay. All right.
Take care, guys.
Don, you want me to end it?
No, stay on for a minute.
It's still recording.
It is still recording. Hold on one second. That's weird. The recording, oh, that's funny because you're the host. That's why I can't find the recording button. Hold on, I have to take back the power. I actually cannot do that.
Give you back the power.
Yes, you do.
Let's see. Dawn, Connecticut Freedom Alliance, make host.
Hey, Dawn.
I still do not have the stop recording option. Here we go.